All right, we are live. Welcome on, friends, to a live edition of Dunc'd. Hopefully, we'll get some good ideas as we go through these teams. Every once in a while, our brains just aren't necessarily considering every possibility. So it's always good to have comments to keep us honest or assess some other things that maybe have popped up locally as ideas that we haven't seen so far. So first, though, let's do some faces here. Bradley Beal's opinion of the city of Milwaukee. I happen to love Milwaukee personally, but
So do I.
may not have the same food taste as Bradley Beal.
Very possible.
Okay, your turn.
Let's see. I don't know if you watched it, but the Warriors play the last night against the Lakers.
I did not watch that one.
It was poor.
Okay. And finally, the fact that the mock trade deadline recording is scheduled. We never know for sure. I never want to say it because you're inviting an act of God that'll mess it up. But the fact that the mock trade deadline is scheduled for tomorrow. All right. Let's go ahead and do a show here. I'm going to tweet us out and then we can start. This is always the amazing part of the program here. All right, let's get to work right now. Welcome on, everyone, to this very special mock trade deadline eve edition of Dunc'd On. And want to remind everyone that they can use the promo code mock deadline 25, and that will get you 35% off a yearly membership to Dunc'd On Prime, just in time to listen to the entire mock trade deadline. Kevin Pelton, Dan Feldman, Danny, and I will be recording that tomorrow, and hopefully it will be out in the evening, internet and all other gods willing.
Let's hope.
Yeah. So let's get started here on the Pacific Division, and we begin with the team we've spent a bit of time on here in the last bit or so, the Phoenix Suns.
The Phoenix Suns are in such a fascinating situation because in many other circumstances, you would say a team that is this expensive that as we're recording this is 23-21 with a negative cleaning the glass differential. Maybe they're looking to retool. Maybe they're looking to pivot or anything else like that. It does not appear that Matt Ishbia and James Jones, pretty much Matt Ishbia, are looking in that direction. That is some of the reporting that's out there. But I think a couple other pieces of context that are important here as we begin with the Phoenix Suns. One is this team is astonishingly expensive. So the Suns are more than $45 million. I have it as more than $46 million over the luxury tax line. That, of course, is deep into the second apron. They have three different players making over $49 million. So that's one, is this team is exceedingly expensive. And then the other one is they're very asset poor. They did just gain those picks in the trade with the Jazz where they gave up their unprotected 31 in exchange for basically the worst of in 3 different years in 25, 27, and 29, which opens some things up. We'll talk about that.
Yeah. So this worst of Cleveland, Minnesota, and then in the latter 2 years, Utah as well. Throwing it back.
Yes. I believe technically actually Utah is included in the first year. It's just that it's not going to be Utah. Anyway, doesn't matter. But so they're really resource poor. And so it's this fascinating situation where in a normal circumstance, a team could look to go the other way, but it looks like they're going full steam ahead. They got these split up picks in order to use them.
Yeah, and the assumption was, well, they must have a Jimmy Butler deal lined up. Bradley Beal is the only player, of course, that they could trade for Jimmy Butler because it bears repeating that when you are in the second apron, you may not aggregate salaries together. The only type of deal that you can do is a trade of one player for some combination of player or players coming back that make less then that one player the other team can aggregate, but you may not aggregate. And so that was the thought, is that, well, the problem was they're going to need to pay something up to get Butler, but also to incentivize a third team to take Beal. Of course, Bradley Beal has his own say in that. And I apologize. I probably gave a little bit too short a shrift to how definitive Chris Haynes' reporting was on the idea that Bradley Beal was not interested in going to Milwaukee, that there wasn't a connection. I guess he didn't specifically say who was not interested in whom with that. But that's now what Phoenix is going up against, is if they want to get Jimmy Butler, they have to find a taker for Bradley Beal. And Beal, of course, is not that palatable of an asset, number one. And then number two, he has a no trade clause, which he is not willing to drop. It has been leaked, even if he arrives in a new destination, because that's giving him the power in Phoenix. Why would you give that up again as you go somewhere else? And then also that he can just veto wherever they're going to send him anyway, if it's not a destination that he likes. And so it would seem that universe is relatively small. Now, perhaps he's got his family in Phoenix. Perhaps Madish Bia could, drive around to the front of his house with a paper bag full of dog poop and light it on fire and see if he can get Bradley Beal to want to leave. But short of that working, as of it seems right now, there may be an impasse as far as getting Bradley Beal moved. And so Phoenix has insisted to reporters that they made the deal for these picks, not only potentially for a Beal deal, but for some other stuff that they could possibly do as well.
But yes, Beal, because they're not, as far as we understand, trading Kevin Durant or Devin Booker in this window, the only way they could add a significant salary is through Bradley Beal. And so Beal makes 50.2 this year, does also have a trade bonus, by the way, though that can only go up to his individual maximum for a given year. And so he is the mechanism. And as you said,
and by the way, it would not apply. He's making more than his max this year.
Yeah, because with cap raises, I'm not 100% sure they'll be true next year, but I believe for this year it is. But it's an interesting situation. But so for Beal, it's, what do you want? Like, he has a lot of control in this process. And while Phoenix
trade
did
bonuses work. Were you talking and I just didn't hear you?
Yeah, that's okay.
Cut out for a second.
It's okay. It's okay.
the beauty of your internet has been doing so well lately too.
Yeah. Anyway.
And of course, go ahead. I just want to say, people who are watching now, if you missed it at the beginning, please feel free to throw in some of your own players or scenarios with respect to some of these teams we're talking about, Pacific and Northwest division here, and we will try to address those, because it's always good to have another perspective, things that we might not be considering. There might be stuff bouncing around the media and the local market that we haven't seen, so it's always good to have that. So
Sure.
So Beal trade bonus won't matter, at least this year, but there are plenty of other impediments. And so it seemed like, Beal was going to end up in Milwaukee, and then, Milwaukee maybe would have to give something up to get off of Middleton and Connaughton and Bobby Portis, and also get under the second apron so they could aggregate those guys. We've been through all those scenarios already. Doesn't seem like that sort of a move is imminent. So it probably behooves us then to talk about maybe what else the Phoenix Suns could do with these newly freed up bad first round picks that they have acquired in exchange for their 2031 unprotected.
And due to the Suns' second apron restrictions, it's actually kind of useful to think about it player by player, because that's the restriction that they're under. And so the next most expensive player that is reasonably tradable on their books is Jusuf Nurkic, who apparently has no relationship at this point with Mike Budenholzer. He has basically fallen out of the rotation after being the starter for this year. And complicating matters for Nurkic is that not only is he owed $18.1 million this year, $19.4 for next year. So even if a team sees Nurkic as a viable reclamation project, that is a very significant commitment. And so you can't trade Nurkic for any player who makes a single dollar more than he does. You could trade it for more than one who makes less, but you need to find a team that is interested in that, or that can be sufficiently incentivized with what you have. But so Nurkic as a vessel, I think, especially considering he's been knocked out of the rotation, you could trade Nurkic for a player at any position, as long as that player makes $18,124,999 or less.
I think you mean 18 million, but
18 million. Yeah. And they wish it was 18,000.
yeah. So I guess the question becomes, the Suns, they also have a couple of decent young guys in Iguodala and Ryan Dunn. You think they want to just hold on to them as cheap contributors, but they could also possibly sweeten a deal here. If you had your pick of guys who we think are available who make $18,125,000 or less, what player would be of interest to you as the Phoenix Suns?
You would love to have another forward-sized guy, especially if you're not getting Jimmy. Like another player who can they're probably going to have to shoot, but who can maybe defend multiple positions, can be in the rotation. The problem is those guys aren't really available, especially at that price. Like the 3s and 4s in this range, like you're not going to get Denny Avdija. We already saw kind of what the price tag is for him. I do think that Avdija would actually be a very good fit.
Of course.
I don't think that Patrick Williams is probably available, and especially with the Bulls' commitment to him for that kind of price, he is technically tradable.
No, I bet you he would be a bit. Does he actually make less than Nurkic?
Yes, he does. He makes slightly less.
Yeah, but I mean that's another one where he just has the idea of him would be great, but I just don't. I mean, he's like losing time in Chicago right now.
A team that desperately needs players like him. Yeah.
He had a pretty funny quote. At least I don't think he was joking, but he was asked about some of his recent struggling. He's like, well, I get confidence from knowing what I've done in this league. And I was like, if that's the source of your confidence, no wonder you're not playing very well because he hasn't really done anything. Although I guess he's done enough to earn $90 million in a player option from Chicago. Yeah, I mean, that's ideally just more athleticism, more shooting on the wing. That's kind of been a perpetual need. I don't know how much they love Ryan Dunn. I mean, they love him overall, but as like a playoff guy, they still have Royce O'Neal to, it would be probably nice to get another center who's better than it's kind of interesting, who I think would be a wonderful fit there is Walker Kessler. They just made a deal with the Jazz, and they probably wanted to get and the Jazz aren't going to be interested in getting those same picks back. They consolidated for a reason, but I think the most obvious place still to upgrade to me would be at center, even though they did get Nick Richards because Nurkic has fallen out of favor here. But
I mean, sure.
In terms of guys, yeah.
In terms of players, Mitchell Robinson, the Knicks. First of all, the Knicks they would have to add a third team just for the nuances of that. But Robinson's injury issues, I mean, that would be a fascinating gamble if the Knicks just don't think he can be healthy. But there are some complications there. And then what I wanted to throw at you, I'm more interested in what you think of it from the other team's perspective, is we've heard some murmuring from the Lakers that Anthony Davis would like to have a center in the rotation, like a center who's better than Jackson Hayes. Rui Hachimura for Yusuf Nurkic. From the Lakers' perspective, we're not talking about it from the Suns. From the Lakers' perspective, how do you feel?
Yeah, I mean, they have very similar money. I think the problem is that Nurkic has fallen out of the rotation. If he were playing well enough that Phoenix would just be holding on to him at this point. And so I think Hachimura probably has more value than Nurkic. As far as the Suns are concerned, he's dead salary at this point. So yeah, it might be nice to have him next to AD as the Lakers. I don't think the Lakers should be going that route personally, because then they also got to play LeBron James at the 3 and they run out of shooting really quickly. And then James has to really guard someone on the perimeter. If you don't, then James has to, this is going on the Lakers, who we'll talk about in a second too, but then you've got to play another guy who can guard the ball at the 2. And that guy's not that great of a shooter. That's going to be a Vanderbilt or a Max Christie type, and maybe Finney Smith, but he's as your best shooter off the ball. That's not great either. So I don't think I would want to go that direction. I'd really want to get someone who could play, which I think the evidence is that Nurkic can't really do that at this point, or he would still be helping the Phoenix Suns. But yeah, in terms of who's available at center, there are certain guys like Robert Williams would be another obvious one, I think, and particularly because they already have Iguodala and they already have Nick Richards. You kind of baby Williams during the regular season and then hope that he could really give you something in the playoffs. and you could also get some savings. So if they now the Blazers, of course, have their own issues. Like a third team probably would need to be involved there so that the Blazers could offload some more salary and fit in taking back Nurkic for Williams under the tax. Would one of these picks, probably not the 25, because that's what would be 29th, but Rob Williams to me is the one guy who makes a lot of sense there. Valanciunas maybe would be another one. The Wiz don't have as many problems in terms of taking back salary. You might have to send back a little bit in terms of matching, but you could still give some savings there. Valanciunas isn't that good, but he's probably better maybe than Nurkic right now. I don't know if that's true. But those are the two guys who make less than Nurkic that maybe could help a little bit. I just giving up one of these prize first round picks for Valanciunas, like Williams, maybe there's some upside there. This is a team that just needs some upside. Maybe that could be a potential thought.
I spent a hot second trying to work on a deal that involved Robert Williams and Matisse Thybulle going to the Suns, but the problem there is that aggregates to too much salary, and you can't do a 2-for-2 structure within the second apron restrictions. There would be ways with the third team involved, but that's not really. But Robert Williams, I really like that idea. It's actually similar in some ways to the Mitchell Robinson one, where it's like get a player who can actually help. Also, the hilarity of trading Yusuf Nurkic back to the Blazers, so they would theoretically have Nurkic and Ayton, who were once traded for each other. But I appreciate the idea, and I think that those guys are there. And at the guard spots, there are a lot of people who I think would help the Suns, like Malik Monk fits in, but you can't get Malik Monk for what they have. Malik Monk is too good.
Well, Ayo Dosunmu was the other guy who occurred to me as a possibility if he were to be available. I still. Jake and I talked about that. He seemed to think that the Bulls wouldn't shut teams down asking about Dosunmu and Kobe White. I think it would probably be prohibitively expensive for Phoenix to do that, particularly because they would also be trying to get saving, particularly because Chicago also is relatively close to the tax. They've got about $4 million or so they could use up there. But I think a guard who can shoot and guard the ball would be the other thing on my realistic wish list for the Suns.
And that's a lot to ask. It's hard to do. One of the other guys who actually fits in here salary-wise is Kevin Huerter, but he's very redundant with the other potential guy in this kind of salary range that the Suns could trade, theoretically, and that's Grayson Allen. And so Grayson Allen makes $15,625 this year, but the problem is he has another 2 years and then a player option for 27-28. So that means you have to really want to be in the Grayson Allen business. It is one of the big challenges that these teams signing long contracts, basically they're like, we have the money, like we don't have the flexibility, is if the contract becomes negative value, well, then it's not helping you at all. And so with Grayson Allen, I mean, he was the league's, I think he had the highest percentage 3-point shooter last year, but is another team excited about giving him, $17 million a year for the next 3 years after this one? My instinct is no.
Yeah, I think that's fair. Another guy I thought about for the Suns was Bruce Brown, but he makes too much at $23 million. Right. So that wouldn't really work either. And yeah, I'm not really sure, especially on like some of these bad teams. I'm not really sure who's out there that they're going to love. And so maybe there's a guy on a rookie scale deal that they could pry free that they think could help them and be part of their group going forward. But I mean, they still, especially if they can't move Beal, like he's going to still be there. He's going to be their bench scorer. They don't need more scoring. It goes back to what their main problem, I think, is even more so. Like, yeah, their centers have been awful. They could still use more help there potentially. But like, I just think like Booker and KD and Beal haven't been good enough. Like that's the biggest thing that needs to change. Like, I don't think that their supporting cast, if those guys were like at the level that they were supposed to be at when they put this team together, that like the supporting cast would be like killing them necessarily. And yeah, you would like to have a more experienced center who could really help.
A way to phrase this is the Suns, you can make an argument that the Suns being 12th on offense is more concerning for what they want to be than them being 24th on defense.
Yeah, I think that's right. And all right, so let's we got a couple of comments here on the Suns. One is that the Suns might as well ship KD to Memphis. They are winning nothing. I mean, I completely agree that they should be like opening up those sweepstakes now because they're done and they just need to accept that. But that's not the way Matt Ishbia thinks. And maybe that'll be something that comes to a head in the summer, particularly with only 1 year left in the deal.
Yeah, I'll
KD,
mention,
but I think you could get way more for KD.
I'll mention briefly for Dunc'd on Prime subscribers, Nate and I had a conversation about that when the Suns made the precursor trade when they did the Jazz deal. We talked about should they be trading KD instead. Nate and I both agreed they should.
So, and then the other thing, do the Suns want Marcus Smart? Nurk could play in Memphis. That would not work cap-wise. Marcus Smart makes more than Nurkic, so therefore it could not be legal. And I also don't think that Nurkic is better than any of the bigs that are playing right now in Memphis, at least for what they want to do. So,
well, and briefly, very briefly, if the Suns and Mike Budenholzer could be slightly independent from James Jones, we've brought a lot how Nurkic isn't playing. If they actually really wanted to trade him, they should have been playing him, because this is going to really make it harder for teams to be interested.
Yeah. Now things were so bad, about 3 weeks ago that I think, and then Nurkic had this illness or whatever too, even though he was out of the rotation before then. But and that may have even been like an obfuscation to call that an illness. But in any event, I think they just felt like the ship is sinking so fast. Who cares about his trade value? Like, we have to start winning some games. Most likely to be traded on the Suns?
I still think it's one of the low salary guys, Bol or Damian Lee, because the savings are so massive. If you can find a home for one of those guys, you're just offloading with the penalties as punitive as they are. So I'll go Bol.
Yeah, Lee, I think they like him. He hasn't played at all, but they like him as a character guy. But just for a note here, their tax payment right now is $167 million. Even to lop off that $2 million, that would save you a ton. That would move you down. Let's see, if you want to throw in the what would be with 14 players, that would still save them $7 million in tax and maybe another $1 million in salary, just to move one of those minimum guys and then sign someone for the rest of the year. So yeah, it does seem like Bol or Damian Lee. I think also even Monte Morris, maybe there's another team that would be interested in him just as a backup point guard and like give the Suns a second that they could then flip around or something like that. So, but I still say it's Nurkic, because you can't aggregate together, although you could sort of just do two separate transactions, one of which was involved one of the minimum guys. But I think it is Nurkic, number one, because they want to get rid of him, and number two, they got these first burning a hole in their pocket that they're going to attach to him. So I'm going to say Nurkic. Let's see if we got any other questions here on this one. Okay, let's roll on to, I'll let you pick the next team here in the Pacific Division.
Let's do the Lakers. And the Lakers, LeBron took that slight pay cut so they would avoid some of the apron restrictions. We'll, of course, see whether that actually holds with what they do at the deadline. They've already made a significant move acquiring Dorian Finney-Smith for 3 seconds, though I believe they got one back in that deal. There is, of course, going to be pressure from LeBron and potentially Anthony Davis and the overall clutch conglomerate to use some of their resources to get better. And the Lakers don't really have much in the way of expiring salary. All of their expiring salaries are pretty low money. So it's complicated for them to really upgrade it unless teams want what they have.
Yeah, so the recent talk is AD wants to play the 4. He had an interview with Shams in which he said that. And getting another 5 wouldn't be crazy difficult. Like, there are some players like that. Another guy, again, Rob Williams, would be someone who, at least with his mobility defensively, could fit in reasonably well with AD. Your big problem right now for the Lakers is matching salary. They moved on from their only major expiring contract in D'Angelo Russell. So now you've got Rui, who makes 18 next year. You got Gabe Vincent, who makes 11.5 next year as well. And Jared Vanderbilt, who has 3 more years making just under the mid-level in those years and was a candidate for worst contract. So he at least did come back and play against Golden State on Saturday. So those are your matching salary, but none of those guys, I would say, are just a free lunch for the other team. If I'm another team, not only do you have to give me value for the guy I'm sending out, but you got to give me value for taking in one of those matching salary players. They kind of addressed the 3-and-D aspect with Finney Smith. But they could always use more. They could always use more shooting who can play defense. And they have, even if they don't want to play AD at the 4 that much, certainly someone better than Jackson Hayes, Christian Wood. I don't know if he's ever going to come back. He certainly is a obvious trade candidate. He's also making the minimum, so any team could take him in. And then they really, Christian Coloco is on a 2-way, so they really would want to, even if it's a lower level move, upgrade at that backup center. But then you again run into these issues of the matching salary and the team having to take something back. Like if let's say you wanted to trade for Jonas Valanciunas. If I am the Wizards, I guess Gabe Vincent is your matching salary. Gabe Vincent is in the rotation, by the way. He's like the closest thing to a 3-and-D guard that they have. But like you gotta, I don't know that you gotta do a bunch of seconds to get me to take back Gabe Vincent for next year, in addition to sending out Valanciunas.
I agree, and you could theoretically send Rui Hachimura back to his former stomping grounds in DC, but I don't know how thrilled the Wizards are for that, especially if they don't have a Kyle Kuzma trade in the offing, and we don't know that they do. So yeah, Vincent, we got asked a question of like, is he untradeable? He is absolutely tradable, but he is not positive value. And that is the delineation that probably matters most to the Lakers. And then the other question I had for you is, we've talked about the Lakers potentially upgrading at center, and I believe that they can, is also you have to decide, and this involves intel from various different people, can you do better trading for somebody than you can on the buyout market? Now, the Lakers can't get everyone who's bought out because of some of these restrictions, but they can get a lot of them. So that requires the intel from Pelinka and everyone else that you can talk to of, okay, we could get player X in a trade, and what are the assets that are required for that? And then also we could get player Y in a buyout. Now, would that player be most interested in the Lakers if the job is being
and does he make less than the mid-level, because they're
Exactly.
above the first apron right now? So they would, and $7 million above the first apron, even after shedding some salary in the D'Lo during Finney Smith deal. So they really, it would have to be, I don't know who else, PJ Tucker, like, sure, fine, come on down. I think, but and I don't know that he can play anymore. I actually, maybe I do know that he can't. So that's I don't know that I would be putting my eggs in the buyout market basket as the Lakers, because there just aren't that many guys who are obvious buyout candidates that make less than the mid-level that are going to help them.
That's true. And so and a lot of the guys who are kind of in that range are doing well for their team or are valued, so like that's harder to do as well. So I think technically Larry Nance, I believe Larry Nance makes right around that, but the Hawks aren't going to waive him. So like that doesn't really matter. And the other pressure that the Lakers are under, and these things can be related or not, is that they are spending a ton of roster spots at the bottom of this. I've hammered Pelinka for his use of player options over the last couple of years on guys who either aren't in the rotation or aren't that good. So you could theoretically save some money by offloading those guys, the Cam Reddishes of the world. Shake Milton's not playing for them. I think Shake Milton could be better than this, but Shake Milton, they declined the option on Jalen Hood-Schifino. Some of these players, offload them ideally into another team's exception, and then that gives you gives you more wiggle room to sign somebody. But again, then you're signing somebody for the minimum.
We are probably giving a little bit of short shrift to the idea of them making a larger move, and like they are starting to play well. I know their net rating hasn't been good, but they're actually, maybe even in the mix for home court advantage in the West. If they could add a piece, like that's, as hilarious as it is, they are in much better shape right now than they have been at this point in the season in some of these previous years, but really since 21 that they've been in this sort of shape. And LeBron and AD have been healthy, and that could change at any time. But like, let's assume that they've shown enough here that LA were willing to put their two major assets in play, which is a 29 first and a 31 first. They also would have swaps in 26, 28, and 30 available if they wanted to. Is there anyone out there at all that would be worth giving up those sorts of assets?
I can't think of anybody offhand.
What about Ingram?
I don't think Ingram solves their problems, and I think he creates some new ones. He's definitely a good player. If we're talking just player quality, but because
I mean, they don't actually have anyone who can score that well in the mid range. I actually think he would be a little bit better of a fit there, possibly, than.
But
some
I mean,
might say
my issues on it are more defensive. That Ingram isn't a great on-ball defensive player. LeBron doesn't really want to do that. Anthony Davis has to be doing everything else. And so if your intention is to play those three gentlemen together in your starting closing lineups, someone's going to have to do that, and someone's going to have to.
But it does give you a lot of size, at least. Like, size is kind of a currency, even if none of the guys are that amazing. Just to have bodies out there as a deterrent, like, it's at least somewhat interesting. But again, so the matching salary there is probably, it's going to be Rui. Obviously, has to be in that deal. Then you probably got to go. I mean, then you're running into Vincent. You would have to go Vincent and Vanderbilt, because the Lakers can't take back more salary than they are sending out in one separate deal because of their restrictions of the first apron. Anytime you do that, you're hard capped to the first apron. They're above it right now, so they wouldn't be able to do that. They also have like Dalton Connect, maybe, that they could include in a deal if a team were interested in him. But so you don't think, let's say you would do, because I just don't think, like, New Orleans, they have their own salary problems as well, right? Like, they can't take on, the whole idea of trading Ingram is that they can't afford him. So then again, you got to get a third team involved to take one of Hachimura and Vincent and Vanderbilt. At least, maybe one of those three guys has to go somewhere else, and they all have money for next year. So even if New Orleans was like, yeah, you know what, we'll take a single Lakers unprotected 29 first and maybe a swap to take these guys back. But then they're like, we're kind of stuck here in terms of what we're able to trade. What about CJ McCollum? Would he be interesting here?
He'd make them better, but I don't think he'd make them better enough. Definitely a talent upgrade off of what they would probably send out. Though we run into the same, because they're trading with the same Pelicans, you run into the same salary issues as you were before.
But yeah, that's true. You would. But at least it would be like it'd be some guys who were broken up that then the Pels could get off of more easily.
True.
Going forward, but that, or maybe just any other kind of scoring guard for them.
I thought about DeRozan as well. DeRozan is a lot
don't
cheaper.
Think he's available at this point.
Exactly. Yeah. I don't think that he is. I mean, it's so funny because two of the other guys in that price range that I was looking at were guys that they've been rumored to be interested in the past, with DeJounte, who's having a terrible year overall, and then who's also on the Pelicans, another one of these issues. And then DeRozan, who, it seems like he's, the Kings are doing so much better now that he's not going to be on the move.
What about Zach LaVine? He's making 43. So you got to go Vincent, Vanderbilt. Hey, you're still actually not enough there. You'd have to put in one more guy. Maybe it would have to be Max Christie. Like, Hood Schifino actually is an expiring contract, but that's now a 4 for the Bulls. Maybe you could send back a minimum guy there to equal out the roster spots. But Zach LaVine, I mean, the Bulls probably want more than just the one unprotected pick there.
I think so.
Especially given what they're having to take on going forward. So yeah, Vincent, Vanderbilt, Hachimura. Yeah, you're still under LaVine's salary. So I think if you put in Hood Schifino, you're there too. And then Chicago could send back a minimum guy as like a Taylor Horton Tucker, old friend, could go back. in that one. Yeah, you know, I'm not like, I think that would be crazy bad for LA. They just would kind of run out of depth at that point too. Like they wouldn't really have any backup for, like Rui isn't that great. He's overpaid, but he still plays an important role there. You're putting a lot on Max Christie at that point. Like your guard defense with Levine and Reeves, then Max Christie starts at the 3 or Finney Smith. That's not terrible. That would be interesting. I would, and also even like having a Levine and Davis group, like that's maybe not a championship team, but you're still going to hold on to Davis. You want to be competitive the next 3-4 years. He could be. He's also a clutch guy. I would very seriously explore that. Making the money work would be hard, and the roster spots. But I would very seriously explore that. Let's see if we got any comments here. Yeah, Miles says, what level apart I trade those 2 Lakers picks for? I think it would really have to be, because again, you run into the issue of like, well, you got to pay the team to take these other guys too. But I think a Levine level of player would be the lowest. So maybe like, I don't think even what Jeremy Grant used to be would be enough.
I agree.
Yeah, so like Adam asks, is Gabe Vincent tradable? Like, yeah, but you got to pay someone to take him, right? Like he's really been, you know, a very back end of the rotation player, I would say, making 11 million.
And for so many of these guys, it's that money beyond this season that makes things even more complicated, because it's not even like, oh, you can justify it. And I supported the D'Angelo Russell deal, but it is harder now to make subsequent trades because you just don't have those players that are easier facilitators. Player most likely to be traded, I'm going to go Reddish, because as one of the minimum guys, and because Reddish, like some of these guys, is a multi-year minimum. That means that you actually save more for the season, because it's not subsidized in any part. It's the full 2.5 million.
Yeah, I'm going to make it Christian Wood, just because he may not even play this year, whereas Reddish at least is like a semi-deep rotation option who can give him a body on the wing at times. But surely one of those guys are going to get moved just to open up the roster spots and reduce their tax payment. But did we say how they're fixed for seconds? We should probably actually say that before we go.
That's a good point. Let me take a look. The only extra one they have is actually from the Clippers, incidentally, in 2025, and then they owe their own in basically every year. So they actually have their own in 25, but then they owe their 26, 27, 28, 29, 30, and 31. How do they still have their 25, by the way? I don't understand how that happened.
Yeah, it's really amazing. You would have thought that they would have burned through that quite some time ago. Yeah, let's get to the other LA team. And yeah, the Clippers, they're just playing well enough right now that things are totally different. I think that there are a lot of teams that are playing a little bit better than expected. The Clippers playing a lot better than expected. I'd say Kawhi is back. He's looking pretty decent. They're winning games right now. And yeah, I'm sure there would be a wonderful market for the likes of Derek Jones Jr. or Batum or Amir Coffey, among all these teams that are in second apron hell that really could use players like that. But the Clippers are like better than all those teams, which is insane. And I mean, again, like the whole Kool-Aid of like Kawhi coming back and what that looks like. I mean, I don't know that there's anyone that I'm gonna say the Clippers can't beat in the West, other than maybe the Nuggets. I think they just don't match up great against. Although Zubats has gotten a lot better, I think, against Jokic than he was in the past. But I mean, I wouldn't necessarily favor them against a lot of these teams, but they could get a top 4 seed. Like they could win a round. Like nobody just gives up on that and trades guys away. So it's really to me more about possibly adding to this team.
It potentially is, which is such a shocking turn of events. That said, something that I think will be looming large for this front office is that historically, when teams that aren't elite are this narrowly over the tax line, they try to get under. Yes, Steve Ballmer is immensely rich, but you try to get under, push some of these obligations back, repeaters, all that fun stuff. You do it, and so they could do both of these theoretically at the same time, potentially. But just to let people know, so basically at this juncture, the Clippers are 2.5 million over the tax line. That is really not that much. The bad news for the Clippers is that they don't actually have that many expendable players making slightly more than that, but they do have one, and that's Bones Highland. I'll talk about him as the most likely guy to be traded for a reason later on. But I agree with you on the general conceit, and I want to go back there, is like the Clippers could very well add. I don't expect any of their big ticket guys to be going elsewhere. That would be Kawhi Leonard, 49 million, Harden at 33.7, Powell at 19.2, and Zubats at 11.7. And especially with Kawhi and Harden, like it's hard to imagine them going in a deal where you got someone better. I love Zubats. It's hard for me to imagine that with him too. And then with Powell, he plays a vital role for them. And even if they, now they have more creators with when Kawhi is available and everything else. So to me, the mechanism to improve is likely using PJ Tucker as a way to bring in a viable rotation player, with the dream being that player that you add could close some games.
Yeah. Now, what do they have though in terms of assets to bring someone back? Of course, we know where they are in terms of picks. I don't think they could trade a 2030 or 2031 first if they wanted to. They could try to Horcrux out another one of these swaps, possibly. They're likely going to have the number 30 pick this year from OKC that they have to swap out. And so reswapping that, probably not going to be particularly lucrative for them. And then they've got swaps with OKC in 27 and then Philly in 29. That's one, and it's top 3 protected. So that's one that maybe you could Horcrux out if you wanted to, but I don't see that necessarily happening. So in terms of what these guys need, backup center is the first thing that comes to mind. Now, their backup units have actually been okay, with Batum still somehow at 36 years old, anchoring some of those groups. And so I think it would be still a priority to get one more guy in. Like, they're playing Zubats a lot of minutes too, just to have the option of resting him on occasion that he was out with that cornea operation. They immediately lost 2 straight. So in terms of if you wanted to swap Tucker for a center, like that's also, Tucker is interesting because he just provides salary relief for a team. Like, there's aren't even like $11 million expiring contracts are relatively few and far between. And then you could even put him together with Bones and get up to 15 million. And they have still 4 million below the first apron. If they wanted to add salary in a move that they really liked and just pay the tax again, they could certainly do that. So who sticks out to you, if anyone? I mean, that's another Rob Williams possibility. But then just the question becomes, what do they really have to give Portland for him? Like, if I'm Portland, I like Phoenix giving up one of those firsts, and maybe something else as well to get Rob. But the good news for the Clippers is they can offer Portland salary relief, which they desperately need after this year, but they just don't really have a first that Portland would really be that interested in, nor do they have a young player that Portland would be particularly interested in.
I think the savings for Portland are more compelling than I don't think they're getting a first for Robert Williams anyway. So if it's, I
still think, well, we'll talk about it. I still think they should just stretch DeAndre Ayton, or at least keep that in their back pocket as a way to just fix all their money problems next year.
It could potentially, but if they, Portland has a strong draft pick and they can shed Robert Williams money, then they're probably going to be clear to handle whatever business they want to do, even if they can't move Jeremy Grant, even if they can't do any other things. So I think they should at least consider it. And so Robert Williams to me is high on that, and savings do really matter. And Portland, they have some resources from some of the other stuff they've done. In terms of other players, I mean, you could roll the dice. It's on the higher end of this price range. You'd have to combine some guys. Like, you could roll the dice on Mitchell Robinson. And again, it's the health-related stuff. You have to commit multiple years to him. I've thought about Valanciunas as well. So Valanciunas, PJ Tucker for Valanciunas doesn't get the Clippers all the way out of the tax, but it gets them close enough that they could do it through something else pretty cleanly. And Valanciunas is owed money for next year, okay, but then he has a non-guarantee for that third year. So I don't think they, if the Wizards are looking for assets, that's probably not going to be enough. That's why I think a Robert Williams deal is more compelling from the trade.
Yeah, I just don't think they're going to have the best package for him.
I agree. But in
just
terms
because,
of
just because of the expiring contract of Tucker, you think that's going to trump possibly getting a first from the likes of Phoenix?
It's a pretty bad first. But maybe. And then because we're talking about basically the Clippers offering no asset or pretty close to no asset. I don't think that's enough to get Larry Nance. I don't think that's enough to get. It probably would be to get Olynyk, but Olynyk, I don't think he solves their problems.
Yeah, we got a question here from DZ. Clippers fans have been talking about the following backups on his: Chris Boucher, Robert Williams, Kelly Olynyk, Jonas Valanciunas, and Nick Claxton. How many of these are possible? How are they fixed for seconds? Did we talk about that yet?
I believe it's bad. I will look at it right now. They
usually do a better job of not getting like totally denuded in those areas.
They don't have one until 2031. Oh, actually, they have their 2030, but there's a swap right involved, so they could trade outside of the swap right.
Okay, well, they used to have a lot of them, but they traded all 12 of them for Luke Kennard. So, yeah, I mean, like, Boucher, I think, would be kind of interesting because he could play, like, maybe even play next to Zubats a little bit because he's been shooting all right. He's an expiring contract. Again, though, it's just like, what is the asset that's going back? I was actually kind of excited about the Clippers adding someone, and then you just see how limited they are in terms of what they can do. That I've grown less excited. Again, like Boucher, I think the Raptors would just want to hold on to like a 2031 second to swap Tucker for Boucher. Olynyk has money for next year. Maybe Toronto would just want to get off of that. I just don't think of Olynyk as at all a playoff player. Maybe playing next to Batum, it could be okay, but he's just so limited athletically, also a health risk. Valanciunas, yeah, I just don't think the Clippers would have the best package for a lot of these guys. And Nick Claxton certainly makes too much, particularly to be a backup. Like their salary structure he can't play next to Zubac. So $25 million a year for a guy who actually like hasn't really shown much in the last 2 years as well and is making a lot. Dayron Sharp says maybe that's one's a little bit more interesting. I just like, even like in terms of lower level prospects, like they just don't have like anything that like, unless you can interest someone in a totally unused Kobe Brown or Cam Christie or Jordan Miller on a two-way. I just don't think that they have the juice to get anything done, which is kind of too bad because I've really enjoyed this Clippers team this year. And then you also run it if you want to talk about getting out of the tax too, like Bones Highland making 4.1. Yeah, you could get out of the tax, but again, what are you giving up?
I think you could potentially, depending on how a couple of these teams go, like with the exceptions that are out there, you could see a team that might want to be willing to roll the dice on Bones, and like that basically would have that money to burn, but they also have to have a roster spot, so that's tricky.
Yeah, what a terrible trade to get him, by the way. That was just a complete waste. All right, yeah, so I would still put Bones as most likely to be traded, but Tucker is up there too. He could get bought out as well, you would think.
Yeah, it's a close call between those two. I'll go Bones just because there are ways that they could move him and then not have to do anything else.
DZ says, can I get 35 seconds of Harden praise with no layers of shade sprinkled in? I'm sorry, I don't think you can.
You could,
especially because like he's probably gonna like make the All-Star team this year. Like that, it's gonna drive me insane.
I'm
sorry. I can't go. Like, well, all right, here I'll give you. Like, still can really distribute. Plays every single night. He's durable. Can play a ton of minutes. And he's actually still been. He's not a great defender, but he's been. Oh wait, was that shade? But he has been a part of a good defense this year. So there you go. I ran out long before by 35 seconds, but
Well, and so
that's
the
not
thing,
the subject of the show.
I'll throw something else out, which is that Harden has been a decent engine for them offensively. And even though the Clippers offense hasn't been great when he's been on the floor, they've been much better than when he's off. And the Clippers have very limited offensive personnel. So he's been very important for what they needed. He's been a key part of what kept them afloat, particularly during the non-quiet time. So I think he's been important for them. So I'll say all that. I won't say all the other negatives, but I think he's been very important for their success.
Okay, let's move on to the Sacramento Kings.
Sacramento, the success that they've had after the coaching change certainly shifts their dynamics, and it's encouraging, of course, for them that they are. So as we're recording this, the Kings are 23-22. They still have that positive clean the glass net rating, which they did. That was all the clutch performance stuff. And so that means that the vibes are a lot better, and that in no way, shape, or form should dissuade Monty McNair from making some moves that can make them better. Sacramento, to me, the thing that the most obvious thing that they have to do is backup center. And it's a shame that they've gone this far in the season without a credible backup center. And I think this is more like use a second, get a buyout guy, but I'm going to be massively disappointed if they go into March without somebody better than Trey Lyles and Alex Len and the other crap that they've been throwing out there at the 5.
Yeah, Lyles has actually been playing a little bit better lately in terms of his shooting, but yeah, just getting a little bit more size I think would be important because they don't necessarily have the scratch to go after a wing player. I don't think we got an earlier question about whether they would go for the 2 first for Cam Johnson. I think the Nets would be very pleased with that. Sacramento, recall, of course, owes their 25 first to Atlanta, top 12 protected from the Herter deal, and then it devolves to top 10 protection and then 2 seconds after 26. So that's an even bet to maybe go this year. So you could offer your first available draft afterwards twice in a row. So that would be, as of now, 27 and 29 first round picks. They, of course, owe a 2031 swap to the Spurs. Not who you want to owe a 2031 swap to. And it just really, like, I don't think that makes sense for Sacramento to do right now. And now maybe if you could get some kind of protection or something and roll it over, but it's like, I don't know that Cam Johnson changes your destiny that much. I'm going to be fascinated to know, like, because I've always felt like OKC actually is the team that should go after him because they have 2 lower level first round picks that they know will be lower level, or they could kind of swap it or pick the third worst in a given year or whatever, and then get Cam Johnson. But like, to me, I'm not even sure that he's like a really good playoff starter, but they have a bunch of athleticism around him. They wouldn't be relying on him to defend some of the best guys or do a bunch of switching. And then in games where you needed a lot of shooting, maybe he could close in that circumstance. But to give up 2 first round picks to bring him in, especially when you don't know the future of De'Aaron Fox, that noise has quelled some under Doug Christie, but it could come back at any time. I would not be too interested in doing more as the Kings than just trying to bolster some of that second unit group and see what I could do with the rest of this team.
I think what you do as the Kings is that you do like a pick involving a first, and you say, hopefully this is enough now or in July.
A pick involving a first. What
no, like a single first, like a single,
Okay.
like an offer involving a single first. And the Kings don't really have much in the way. I wouldn't put Devin Carter in this of like a young guy of interest.
Yeah, supposedly they are not interested in moving him. I would possibly consider that. Actually, the other guy who's been out there as a possible trade candidate is Keon Ellis.
Sure.
And he would actually be a great fit, like on Phoenix, for example, who, like, he can shoot, he can guard the ball a little bit, do a little bit of playmaking, but they also have Devin Carter behind him, so he's somewhat superfluous. Maybe they could get an asset for Keon Ellis and then try to swap him more for front court help. That could I would be more interested in going that route than trading a future first when you just don't know where this team is going, particularly with respect to Fox.
Totally fair. One thing that might potentially lead them down a different path is just presumably the matching salary in like a Cam Johnson deal would be Kevin Huerter, and Huerter making 16.8 million this year, 18 million next year. Like that getting off of that could potentially be useful for them. I don't think that justifies you doing 2 firsts for Cam Johnson.
He's like barely playing at this one. Now that Malik Monk is in the starting lineup, Huerter just is kind of, playing like 12 minutes a game.
So if you can add a high-end rotation player for that, and with Huerter's salary going into next year, not that the Kings are under a ton of salary pressure for 25, 26, they're pretty clean there. So that would be a nice little benefit, but to me, that's not justified. And like briefly on the Cam Johnson thing, I just don't think he makes their best fives that much better. He's a good player, and that.
Well, so yeah, because who's he replacing? Monk?
Probably.
Yeah, I mean Monk has been awesome. So I'm not sure what and I know Cam Johnson has a little more size. I don't even know if he's like that much better defensively than Malik Monk is.
He's definitely not consistent, and the idea that he can take on, and sometimes you want somebody to take on some of the smaller assignments. I mean, Keegan Murray does that too, but like you want somebody who can do some of that. But like the future of Fox is a big enough concern that throwing more future assets, especially if they're unprotected, would be untenable for me in basically all circumstances. Unless you get a guy who's like so good that any iteration of the team would be better with them on it. And I just don't think those kind of players are available. I also don't think they should be proactive and like move Fox now unless he says something. So I think that in the bigger moves for me, unless somebody like overvalues your guys or undervalues their own, I think those are unlikely. And then in terms of, well, how do you upgrade the backup front court? So you could theoretically, I mean, the most obvious would be you trade like a second or two with one of the guys that you already have, like an Alex Len or something, and you get somebody who can fit in there. And also with the loose matching rules at the low end of it, like they could do something where you throw like Alex Len in a couple of seconds to the Jazz for Drew Eubanks, and that would work because they have enough wiggle room under the tax. Something like that is probably how I would do it.
Yeah, Drew Eubanks is actually somewhat of an interesting player. I certainly wasn't wowed by his work last year in the playoffs, but he gives them more at backup center than what they have right now, or at least someone that they would be willing to try. How much better is he really than Alex Len? I don't know. He's got a little bit more athleticism, can finish an alley-oop and switch a little bit, play a more aggressive defensive style than Len. But the biggest thing is Domantas Sabonis just plays 36 minutes a game. And he'll play more than that in the playoffs in theory. So you don't want to give up too much just to fill that hole, which is a hole, but you don't want to go crazy with it. Like, I think trying to get someone like Rob Williams and paying the price for that would be a little bit too much. And so that's why I think Eubanks would be an interesting player for them.
I have one for you. What would you think about Day'Ron Sharpe in Sacramento?
Yeah, it's just like another out, possibly. Yeah, I think, but Sharpe hasn't played very well this year. Like you're not necessarily solving the problem necessarily. And then the other thing too is just they are like totally out seconds. They have 1 second remaining in 2029.
Oh, that's right. Yeah, that's
that
a
they
really
can
good
trade
point.
because 26 and 27 are owed to Atlanta if they don't send the first. So those are tied up, and yeah, I mean that's it. Like they've just have. James Ham has been all over this, that they have just whittled away these lower level assets over the years with picking up a Chris Duarte here, trading away a Chris Duarte there, those sorts of moves. And so like, okay, 2029 second for Drew Eubanks. Okay, I guess like this is another one of these teams that just doesn't have really exciting stuff to trade. That's why the idea of moving Keon Ellis starts to appeal to me more, because they're all in on Devin Carter. Ellis, they could make him a restricted free agent by declining his team option for next year, or another team could do that. Like, I think he would, like, I don't see anyone trading a first for Keon Ellis necessarily. Maybe that Phoenix first that they have that's going to be probably Cleveland's this year at number 29. Like that could be something where Ellis actually would help them and they could get that and then maybe try to make a move that would make a little more sense, attaching that to Herter and bringing back another wing player as well that they could use. But then who is that wing player? There's not anything all that sexy out there on that score either. Okay. Any other thoughts here on the Kings?
No, I think that's about it.
Yeah.
Player most likely.
I mean, because like again, they just run into this mismatch of that's like, yeah, even like a Boucher. You know, Olynyk actually would be kind of interesting there, but they don't have enough athleticism around him to exist defensively with him as the center. He could maybe play a little bit next to Sabonis because he can shoot. I don't know. I'm just, it's a very difficult situation that they put themselves in because I don't want to give up another first. I don't want to give up Devin Carter. So it's kind of just Ellis and let's see what we could get for him because they are a little heavy in the backcourt, and then try to get a couple more rotation guys at the 4 and the 5 would be my strategy. And I apologize that I don't have an obvious target for them necessarily.
No, it's hard. And I really like Keon Ellis. If I were them, I would be really reluctant to move him. Maybe there are circumstances that you would, but to me, it's like a real clear cut, like top 8 rotation guy is really what I'd be looking for. Cause I think Ellis can play.
No, I agree with you. Most likely to be traded, it'd probably be,
I'll go Jordan McLaughlin.
Yeah, they got $4 million below the tax, so I don't know why they would want to get rid of him. I'm
Well,
going to
just
go
as okay, sure.
If they do anything, he's the most superfluous guy. And
yeah, and they're at, if I have it right, they're at 14. They're at 14 guys right now, so they don't have to do anything to clear a spot anyway. So,
right. Warriors.
Let's do it. Warriors. Another team that they're not as narrowly over the tax as the Clippers are. They're more like 5 million. If you want to be more specific, about 6 over the tax line. Teams in this range often try to get under, but when you're 6 million, it's a lot trickier than when you're 2.5 like the Clippers are. And so,
although it's gotten easier now because, of course, there are many teams with their mid-level trade exception out there. So
that's true.
Yeah, the idea of Gary Payton or Kevon Looney, both of whom have their uses for the Warriors. They've also got Buddy Hield, Kyle Anderson as guys in that range, but Hield and Anderson both have money for next year. I mean, they might even want to just roll over Looney or Payton into another guy who just makes money for next year. That could be part of a trade, but that's probably getting a little bit too far afield. I guess maybe where we need to start is just where could they realistically upgrade? Because there isn't that move out there as far as we know that would make sense to say put in Jonathan Kuminga or a bunch of future firsts, of which they can trade basically all of them, except for the bottom 10 of their 2030 first, which goes to Washington.
Yeah, because that pick is top 20 protected. And I mean, there have been rumors about them discussing in prior windows of trying to go after Will Markkanen and Paul George and Jimmy Butler. And I don't think they have the scratch for it, but those moves are pretty painful for them because the Warriors don't have low stress matching salary to get up to that kind of range. They do to get somebody more in the 20 million or so. They could do that with Peyton and Looney or potentially even with Schroeder because they can reflip him. But to get to like a 40 or $50 million guy, that involves Wiggins, Draymond Green, or both. And that, that is a very different decision for Mike Dunleavy and company. So and with how they played, like, I don't think that you doing that doesn't make you a title contender. It might make you a team that can win a round, maybe even 2, but it doesn't make you a team that can win one. So the treasure it would take in terms of assets and in terms of the players you would have to include in a deal, I don't think would be a wise decision for them. The Warriors, it looks a little bit more dire, I think, right now because they have like 3 players basically who play the same position who are all out, and that's very damaging for a team's rotation. So they're, leaning heavily on Guy Santos. They're playing they're playing undersized a lot of the time. But my question to you is, we know obviously DeAnthony Melton's on a different team now. What do the full strength Warriors, what could they add reasonably gettable that would make you more confident that they would make the playoffs in the first place?
They're looking for a stretch five so they can get more space for Kuminga or Steph to drive to the basket. You can play Kuminga, Draymond, and the stretch five together. Nikola Vucevic is the one who's been floated the most. I don't know how big of a market there is for Vucevic outside of the Warriors. And there would be matching salary going back, but that wouldn't be a problem. They've got these expiring contracts like we talked about. They are hard capped and only have $330,000 below the first apron. So that's a consideration, but they could put together 3 contracts, 2 of which would be expiring: Looney, Gary Payton the second, and then either Anderson or Hield. And then they could actually maybe get some savings as well. I don't know if they could get totally out of the tax there. Again, maybe a third team has to get involved. But let's say they're 2025 first and that package for Vucevic. You interested in doing that?
Not as the Warriors, but I am as the Bulls. I mean, not only do you get off of Vucevic's money, but as the Warriors know, I don't think that Vucevic fundamentally changes that. This is the best shooting season of his career, so you always don't want to sell high. Now, get ready to get
high, rather. Yeah.
Buy high is. I would go harder potentially after Miles Turner, but you'd have to know whether he was willing to resign. And I also don't know that the Pacers, I mean, they've been playing so much better that you could even make them an offer that would interest them, because the Warriors can't, like, they can't give the Pacers like commensurate quality. That's just not the way this works.
Yeah, Jake was saying there's an idea maybe that Turner wants $30 million a year and would be available. I think the Warriors could potentially pay that, especially if they sent out similar salary. You do run into maybe some roster spot matching issues in Indiana. I just don't know what Indiana is doing at center if they move Miles Turner. Like, the Pacers are way better than the Warriors.
Agreed.
And they're in a weaker conference as well. Like, the Pacers could have their sights set on a top 4 seed this year. I just don't see why Turner would be available, even with the idea that they might not be able to pay him. Well, then you can always try to move Obi Toppin in the offseason, or maybe Nembhard would end up having to be traded for something as well. That's how you open up the space for Turner. I think I would love to get my hands on him, and I would certainly offer my 2025 first to do that. I don't want to. And again, the other thing to remember too is the opportunity cost here. Part of why Golden State has espoused this philosophy of wait and see is they know they're not that good. And even Miles Turner, as decent a player as he is, better offensively than defensively at this point, like, he's not making this a championship team. So they want to hold out for those sorts of things. And maybe if you give up your 2025 first, that's okay. Then you can still go a full draft trade suite in the offseason if you need to, and make that move that's going to change things. But other than that, like, I wouldn't want to trade anything other than that 2025 first.
Not for who seems like they're available at this deadline. I agree.
Yeah. And maybe I would lotto protect it and then drop it down to like top 8 protected, but that's dangerous too. I would say, like, you never know with a team this old what could happen in future years. And they've won enough games. Maybe I would just I would just top 4 protect that this year. But that might be the way to do it. Like, top 4 protected this year, and then, I mean, I guess it would have to be unprotected next year. But that's Vucevic. I don't know how much he helps. I almost feel like it still is like too much to give up. I don't think that changes their destiny enough.
And like 2 other centers who aren't spacing the floor this year, but have that theoretical potential. Wendell Carter, hasn't been starting when Goga Bitadze has been out of the concussion protocol, but Bitadze's been in it the last little while. But I don't see why Orlando would really get into that game. Doesn't save them that much, because Carter only makes about $12 million this year and then actually decreases for next year. And then Isaiah Stewart, who I think would be a fascinating fit on the Warriors. He's not taking or making threes this year, but he has shown that potential in the past. But like, why would Detroit really want to go that direction unless the Warriors had something that really intrigued them? Like, and remember, the Warriors can't trade Moses Moody. Functionally, it's exceedingly difficult right now because with the extension that's poison pill, like that, it's like maybe you could make something work. I haven't done that math yet, but so I don't see.
Yeah,
Stewart,
well, they could, because he makes less than the mid level. So if they wanted to move him into a team with a trade exception, they could do that. But
yeah,
I mean, he should be on a decent contract going forward. They invested him in
I agree. But do you agree with me that like from Stewart and Wendell Carter, like the teams that would be trading with the Warriors probably just wouldn't do it?
Yeah, I don't know what Orlando thinks of Wendell Carter at this point. They're in a kind of a weird spot. I want to see how they play these next couple of weeks. But I still just teams that are good like that generally don't trade players in their rotation for future assets. I think Carter would be a possible buy low candidate, but I think Orlando recognizes that.
Well, and you say for future assets, I think if a Buddy Hield was involved in the deal, that's someone who could help Orlando right now, who fills a gap that they need. So if you
the theory of him, but he hasn't made shots in the last 2 months, so that's a little bit. He's been able to get shots up,
very much so.
I mean, and I don't know that going to the Orlando Magic, the worst shooting team that we've seen in. Since the 2012 Bobcats, is necessarily going to perk up his shooting. But ultimately, like, it's really the Vucevic deal that it comes back to. I think there are arguments either way, but it's got to be probably that 2025 first, top 4 protected. And I don't think Vucevic changed their destiny enough. I think he's under contract for $20 million next year, but he could be just another vehicle to be matching salary for next year in a bigger move, which has some utility. But I just I don't trust what Vucevic is doing. If you assure me that Nikola Vucevic is going to shoot the ball the exact same way he has so far this year, yeah, absolutely, sign me up for that. But he's actually has fallen off quite a bit even in the last month or so. Like, those splits are not trending amazingly well at the moment, and I just. And then he has all these defensive concerns. Yes, they could put a bunch of size around him, and maybe you could go Wiggins, Kuminga, Draymond, Vucevic, Steph, and you could protect Vucevic that way. And because they just want to make I think it's actually important that they make the playoffs this year, just for their brand as a possible destination if there is a disgruntled star.
Mm-hmm.
Most likely to be traded. Probably GP2, I would say, more so than Looney.
I'd say Peyton over Looney as well.
Yeah, I think Looney is just more important to their culture. Peyton is good too. He's been starting for them. Now Kyle Anderson, I think they would like to move him. He's making $9 million, but he's got 2 more years left on that deal. Like, Anderson or Hield actually might be guys I would kind of be more interested in moving just to get off of that money. And maybe that is part of the value you would get in giving up your first in a Vucevic trade. You can kind of talk yourself into that if it's Anderson and Hield moving rather than Looney and GB2.
Well, especially because
I would start to feel a little better about it at that point.
Well, and then the net cost to the books for the Warriors in 25-26 is a lot closer to 0 than it would be otherwise, which is useful. I mean, we don't know what in the world's going to happen with Kuminga, but that probably makes things easier.
Let's see. Couple of questions here that are, we can hit them just because we got them. Warriors need to change their offense to reduce Steph's off-ball movement. I think they do when Draymond isn't playing, or if they don't have another playmaker. But Steph is he's 36 years old. Like, he's going to turn 37. Like, asking him to drive the ball and get to the basket off a pick and roll, I think is kind of difficult. And they also don't have a great roll man in the game a lot of the time. And then Ben says Wiggins can keep guys in front. He can make plays off the ball, but he's no stopper. Yeah, I think since this ankle injury popped up that he hasn't been as effective. Obviously, the Austin Reeves game-winning layup on Christmas being the biggest example of that. But I think when he had some good games against Luka last year too.
I think Ben's talking about Aaron Wiggins. He's responding to Matthew's question. I'm not sure.
Oh, Aaron Wiggins, yes. Well, he doesn't keep guys in front that well either. Yeah, that's true. He kind of struggled last year. So yeah, here we're. But I agree. Andrew Wiggins has not been great defensively. I'm agreeing with myself, but I do agree. Okay, so Yeah, I think most likely to be traded. I'll go with Peyton, but I think there'd be some others. All right, why don't you pick our next team in now the Northwest division and give some early thoughts on that while I get myself a water.
I think I'll begin with the Oklahoma City Thunder. And the Thunder are the Western Conference's best team, arguably the NBA's best team. And as Cleveland has had these struggles, I believe they're tops in clean the glass net rating at this juncture. And the Thunder, they're in this place where they're obviously a great team. They're a serious contender to win the West. They could, of course, win the finals. But I also see a more pronounced issue for them than you often see with teams kind of this caliber, which is second unit creation is the shorthand that I would use for it. And somebody who can generate good looks for themselves and others. And as much as I love J-Dub, Jalen Williams, that is not the biggest strength of his game. And so Oklahoma City, they have that, in my estimation, as a need. But what makes the Thunder unusual is not that they have this need or that it's that they are this good and have the means to improve it should they want to. And what I mean by that is the Oklahoma City Thunder, we're not going to go through all of the picks that they have because the Oklahoma City Thunder have a metric ton of them through their various interactions and being the best team or arguably the best team in the league. And having all these is certainly unusual, but the Thunder they not only do they have all of that, but they also have, if they want to bring it to bear, they have the room exception. They have the full thing still left. And then they also have, I would say, pretty damn good matching salary. So if the goal for a potential trade partner is expiring money, the Thunder actually are not good in that because what Sam Presti did with some of the cap space they had in the exceptions was they gave Isaiah Joe and Aaron Wiggins, they declined options on them, then used their low cap holds and then gave them significant deals. So Isaiah Joe, after this year, he has 2 more years at $23.7 million and then a team option for 11.3. And then Wiggins, it's declining contract. It's 3 more years, $26.5 million, and then a team option off of that. So some teams might not be interested. That's a significant commitment for a guy who probably isn't starting or closing games for you. But they're, to me, clear-cut rotation players. They have been rotation players on the best team in the league. They also have Kenrich Williams, who has this year, next year fully guaranteed, and then has a team option after that. If you want young player sweeteners, I don't know how willing Presti is to throw somebody like Cason Wallace in a deal. I don't know how willing they are to throw Dylan Jones in a deal. Probably aren't doing anything with Topic, who's coming back from a torn ACL, of course. But they also have a metric ton of other firsts, and they don't have many that are like super duper juicy as we know it to be right now. But they have some that could potentially get there in time. We can run through that. But the basics on it are that the Thunder, they have all these resources to come to bear. They don't have expiring matching salary, but they have matching salary. And to me, they have a clear-cut need for somebody who can generate good looks, score, pass, whatever the hell it is, when Shai Gilgeous-Alexander is not on the floor.
So Jake was saying a month ago at the G League Showcase, the buzz was OKC is really interested in Cam Johnson. Now, of course, the Brooklyn Nets have a need to make the Cam Johnson market look as frothy as possible. And yes, to make it sound like the team that has the most picks is interested in him, certainly behooves them. But let's say your package is Cam makes 22.5. They have plenty of room below the tax. So your package is, let's see, who do you value less? Probably Wiggins, I value less than Joe. Would you agree with that?
Tentatively, yes.
And Ousmane Dieng has money for next year. He would be a perfect possible tank commander. So you could actually do Aaron Wiggins and Ousmane Dieng for Cam Johnson. Like that would actually work, and they have enough room below the tax that they could just take on Cam Johnson. Maybe there's another guy coming back from the Nets to equalize the roster spots. And OKC also has their room exception that they didn't use at all, that they can use it in trade up to a little over $7 million to just take guys in if they wanted to go that route. And also, I think that actually the other thing to remember about OKC is they actually have in the future, they have all these picks coming in. If they want to use them, they need roster spots. Like they probably want to move on from Ousmane Dieng because he hasn't really worked out. And the idea was great, but didn't end up happening. They traded 3 picks for him. It took him at 11, but he has money for next year, and I think they're better off just seeing who else could come down the pike for them. So I would absolutely pay what it took to get Cam Johnson for Wiggins and Dieng with some of the picks that they have, particularly if they are picks that are relatively close in time to now. The problem with the Nets, though, is that they already have a bunch of 25 picks, and so they're probably going to be more interested in stuff in the future. Of course, so is OKC. So maybe that's where such a deal would run into problems.
It could. So when you were getting water, I was talking about them needing a creator.
No, I got the Bluetooth headphones in. I heard.
No. But I was talking about. It's funny how this happened because I agree with you. Cam Johnson is the most highly touted guy that they've been rumored to consider. I don't think he solves that problem. You can say that he solves some other ones, and that having a good shooter, having somebody who's confident. But we talked about this a little bit when we were talking about Cam Johnson with the Kings, which is you bring him in, you're giving up 1 or 2 firsts, whatever, maybe a first and a player of interest to make it happen. Where does he fit into this Oklahoma City rotation? Is he closing games for them once they have their
possibly guys? He's a luxury basically, and I realize, and I agree with you that they need someone else on the ball, but he's at least someone that you can run plays for off the ball. So if he's got pretty good size too. He could fit into some of those second units led by J-Dub. Because I don't know that there's a high enough level of player who can also defend that they want to bring in. Maybe that's Colin Sexton. That was the other guy that I kind of really had in mind. Not a guy we've heard as much buzz about, obviously, as Johnson. And Sexton is a clear non-closer for them, though, whereas I think Cam Johnson could end up closing some games for them, but other games maybe not. Maybe they would go with more defense instead.
It's very possible.
But particularly I actually think the shooting thing might even be more of a concern for me than the creation thing, because they need more shooting in the closing lineup, whereas the creation thing is just to get you through the game for the 10 minutes that Shea is sitting. So I actually would say shooting with passable defense is a greater need for them.
My concern, though, is that they have so many good players. Is just where does Cam Johnson fit in? And your framing of him as a luxury item, I think, is a fair one. That he doesn't close every game, but he could potentially close some. And we saw some of the limitations that OKC's guys had offensively in the playoffs last year. And so having another guy that you can throw in, another lever you can pull, and they have the ability to spend multiple first-round picks on that player and make it work. I had been more fixed on the idea of. I like the idea of them bringing in a second unit guy that doesn't have the latitude to close, just because they can understand their place within the hierarchy. I think Sexton is compelling there. I don't think they have the resources, of course, to do it, but I don't think that there's a realistic way for them to come to an agreement with Sack for Malik Monk, but Monk would be fascinating. Can you throw enough at Sacramento to have them give up a guy who's starting for you, just 2 firsts or something else? They have all these other dudes, Maybe not. And I mean, Monk would be probably not closing for the Thunder, but he'd be on the Thunder. Sexton's compelling. Let's see, who else would be kind of in this, could generate offense for them? Because it doesn't have to be a point guard. I think that there are some people who use point guard as the shorthand. It could be a point guard, but it doesn't have to be. Simons is probably overqualified for it, and he makes enough money that the matching gets a little bit tricky.
Yeah, I think he probably makes too much for a guy, again, who's very rarely going to close for you.
And the other thing I brought the idea of fixed free figures is that I wouldn't necessarily be as interested in somebody who is injury prone. So if you bring in Malcolm Brogdon, then you start to have to worry about who's the backup for the backup. And because Oklahoma City's matching salary are actually good players, it's not a circumstance of, we could trade this guy who's making $15 million and sucks for this. It's if you have to trade Isaiah Joe in a deal for Malcolm Brogdon, I'm a lot less interested.
Yeah, I think Brogdon, he is someone that they, in theory, could re-sign. But yeah, I think Isaiah Joe might help them more than Brogdon, frankly.
However, they could theoretically be a buyout team. If Brogdon gets bought out, they are not limited in the same way that these other teams are. They could try to
They
kind
have
of
the whole room exception,
and they have the whole they could push that if they wanted to. Be like, hey man.
but I don't think Brogdon will get bought out. I think he'll want to maintain his bird rights. He's more of a sign and trade candidate, or maybe even he comes back on a more reasonable salary to then be traded by Washington. We talked about him obviously in the Southeast section, but
here's one for you. Again, we talked about the Thunder having more resources they know what to do with. Again, a player who is not formally on the market. Would you be willing to throw enough for Kobe White that the Bulls would jump?
Yeah, now Chicago doesn't have this issue with that, say Brooklyn does, where they just have a bunch of these picks in the near future. The way Utah kind of has that problem too. They made the deal with Phoenix to kind of get out of that. So perhaps their currency in terms of the current picks would go further. Yeah, he's someone that I would be looking to potentially target. That would be interesting. I mean, they might even just be able to trade Jang for him. They wouldn't even necessarily have to move Wiggins or Joe in that deal.
And if we're talking Chicago, Lonzo Ball would be a possibility as well.
Now that would be absolutely fascinating. That would really be interesting. But with his injury issues and then possibly having to resign, that's the other problem that they come up with, of course, is bringing on a guy who makes a lot 2 years from now when the Chet and J Dub extensions would kick in. And they do have Hartenstein on a team option that year that they could decline. But that it would be one issue with Cam Johnson, is that his money does go into that year, 26, 27. But hopefully it'd be in the last year of his deal. They made this mistake the first time around where they're just too scared to give guys good contracts and figure it out later. And so I would not be concerned about that aspect of things, that he has 1 year left on his deal at that point. I mean, maybe he would be injured, like you couldn't move him then or something, but I don't think that'd be a problem. And they also they'll have so many draft picks to pay up that they could get out of it. I do want to, so like that's the level though of player. Like they're so deep that there's no reason to go for anybody below the level of like a Sexton or a Cam Johnson. But I do want to just talk about the picks that they have, because so they've got this Utah pick that is protected top 10 this year and then top 8 next year. Then they've got the Philly pick this year. That one is actually looking sexy enough that maybe they could just trade that. It's protected 1 to 6 for Johnson, and that's it. And that's good enough that the Nets would be like, yeah, I know we have a bunch of picks in 25, but we'll take this one too. But that Philly pick also is just, they might just want to take the number 9 or 10 pick and get another guy into their system who's cost controlled.
Yep.
They've got Miami's pick lotto protected this year, unprotected in 26. And then they also have their own pick that they can swap for either LA or Houston. That'll probably be in the 20s. So that is 4 picks potentially this year. The Utah pick, very unlikely to go. Then next year, they have 3 picks as well. Probably they've got Utah top 8 protected. Who knows if that ever goes. Then you've got the highest of Clippers, Houston protected 1 to 4, and OKC, and the second highest of those. But all those teams are looking pretty good. Clippers, though, are always a possibility that they could just completely fall off by next year. And then they have a couple of Denver picks in 27 and 29. Both of those are top 5 protected. And then they have a swap with Dallas in 28. So that's what they've got. And you would think if they're making a deal with Utah or with Brooklyn, Brooklyn's going to want maybe those Denver picks later on, or they're of course going to be asking for that Philly pick, and I'm not sure that I would be too interested in that. Maybe I would go the Philly pick or the Miami pick. There's so many permutations that you could get to with these, but I for where they are, I would be going after Cam Johnson. Like that's the one guy, and I think because of the assets they have, they really can outbid any other team's reasonable offer. Like we were just talking about the Kings, like they don't want to give up 2 unprotected first round picks in the future to go get Cam Johnson.
And I mean, they're theoretically the Thunder have the latitude that they could get both Kobe White and Cam Johnson with different matching salary and with picks that they have. I'm not saying they're going to, they won't, but they have the latitude to make those sorts of things happen. I expect a trade deadline from Sam Presti, but they have it. And as you mentioned, and we talked about this a little bit with the Jazz in the trade that they did with Suns a few days ago. It actually consolidating their future assets into good players is good practice for them. I agree that, like we talked about in terms of salary, that they don't have to be super proactive, but I think that a lot of times picks can be more valuable in the abstract than they end up being. And so if you can convert those into players now, you can win some extra games now. That would be very useful, but you do need to use them wisely. And so that's why we're kind of narrowing our focus on a few guys instead of the whole universe.
Yeah, and Brandon noting the roster crunch coming up for OKC. That's part of why I was thinking that they should trade 2 guys, maybe even 3. Maybe even would put Kenrich Williams into that as well, to try to get Cam Johnson and open up a little bit more space for all these picks that are coming in. And it's going to be a real interesting market with teams like Brooklyn, OKC trying to just kick the can down the road in terms of picks in this 25 draft. It's supposed to be a good draft too, but the teams that can't roster all of these guys, but they'll be competing with each other to trade these picks into future years. That'll be a fascinating dynamic as the draft comes along. Most likely to be traded, I'm going to say it is Jeng.
Same.
Next up in the Northwest Division,
I'm going to let you pick.
Portland.
Sure. That's actually where I was going to go to. The Blazers, teams this bad usually aren't this expensive. Not just this year, but this year and next, where they have, they're right up against the tax. They're a couple million below this year, and then next year they're probably clear of it. But when you add in draft picks and stuff, it gets a little bit thornier.
So next year, as of right now, I have the Portland Trail Blazers as. Oh no, I guess they are actually. What do we have them? Yeah, we have them with $6 million in room below the tax for next year,
which is incredible when you think about how bad this team is. And they haven't been devastated by injuries, like it's not like the Pelicans or something. But a lot of those.
Hold on. Give me a second here. Why do we have different numbers on this for them? Yeah. Okay. Never mind. Yeah. So we have them as 6 million below the tax for next year. So, all right, it's not the end of the world. I thought that they were actually in the tax for next year, but I was misreading it before. So apologies. I know this is great radio.
Yeah, the cap bump helped them out a little bit there, but they're it seems like their pick is going to be both kept because it technically is owed to the Bulls if they make the playoffs. They're not making the playoffs. But so for Portland, it's how do we change that reality? And can we change that reality? And we don't need to talk about how they should have traded Jeremy Grant. They should have, but what do they actually do? And so for Grant, you listen, and as Joe Cronin, the comparison is what are we getting offered now versus what can we possibly be offered in the summer of 2025 when teams just have more flexibility, but Jeremy Grant is 6 months older and you're different place regarding his contract. And it's a similar conversation with Robert Williams, who of course is a perpetual injury risk, but is under contract for next year. And so you don't have to move anyone, but those two are probably the most prominent. But there are a lot of scenarios where even if for Grant, the best time to move him would have been far earlier than this, where it's still better to do it now than to do it later.
Yeah, I think so. If you can get anything for him, even if you got to take back some pretty bad money, there's not much worse money out there than him. And at age 31, I did a long breakdown on him last week and his defense. I'll summarize that by saying I think he is pretty decent one-on-one in an isolation, but struggles to get over screens. And he's not necessarily an all-purpose guy, set it and forget it on the other team's best player anymore. Maybe if he were in a different role, he'd be a little more energized and could be better there. But he's never been like a great screen navigator. So yeah, I would be very interested in moving him. And, if it ended up just being for a low level of first this year and matching salary that wasn't as bad as him, I would certainly consider that very seriously. And I feel pretty similarly about Simons, even. It just, the whole issue with the Blazers now, they have weirdly won 4 straight with this jumbo lineup with Shaden and Scoot coming off the bench, but that frankly is to their detriment as well.
Yep.
But just where you're going with Grant and Simons at this point, now maybe Simons, he's only not even 26 yet. Maybe you can say he hasn't played that well this year. He's been injured. Let's take it until the summer, although you probably are also going to need to start shutting him down relatively soon for the tank that only the Blazers can do, although I'm sure the Nets will be rivaling them this season. But Simons, even for like a solid first this year, I would actually do that. But like something that had a chance of being, 16 or higher, or maybe something like that in the future. I just don't know what the market is for Grant or for Simons.
I don't either. And they make, so Simons is making 26 roughly this year. Grant is making 29.8, which that's scary enough. That's enough reason to move him. And with Simons, he will be, maybe you can have an idea of what he's looking for in an extension. 26, 27 will be the first year of his new contract, whether it's an extension or an unrestricted free agency. We'll have to see with that. And where does he fit in the next great Blazers team? It's tricky. I don't think he's good enough on ball to be the guy. And then he's, of course, terrible defensively. He does have, enough off ball game that he can fit in there, but what kind of player, what kind of backcourt are you looking at then? He could be a good bench scorer, but that, you need a lot of better guys in order for him to fit in there. So another team that has that structure around him could potentially be interested. I don't know whether they're going to be bidding now. Like we've talked about Orlando ad nauseum. I still think he could really help them even after this disappointing year. And they actually have matching salary that wouldn't be too much of a problem. But are they going to go head over heels for him? And another consideration for Portland, as we're kind of talking about, like, when do they make these moves, is that they have, except for potentially a pick that goes to the Bulls, it's lottery protected through 2028 and then reverts to be a single second, is that they actually don't have that many extra picks at this juncture. They have a couple things. They have a couple swap rights with the Bucks from the Lillard deal in 28 and 30, and they have one extra second in 2029. But for a team that, should ideally be building their coffers, they don't really have a lot to start with. So that's more context for you should sell at some point. It doesn't have to be selling now, but they're not like where the Jazz are, for example, where they're a bad team and have all these other stuff, where they can be more judicious about their moves.
Yeah, for the Blazers, I'm just like, I want them to make Grant and Simons available, and we talked about this, like, for example, with the Lakers. The Lakers could probably use Jeremy Grant, and it would make sense for them to trade Rui Hachimura probably for Jeremy Grant. Yeah, his contract's bad going forward, but he would still help them more than Hachimura. But there just isn't really an equivalent asset. Would you be willing to do Grant for Hachimura, Vincent, and Dalton Connect if you're the Blazers?
No, I don't think Connect is enough, but I think you could. And the Lakers, the problem is that you can't do one of those like Lakers eventual firsts for a second, because that first isn't like this year. You can get those sorts of deals like that one that happened with the Bucks and the Rockets a couple years ago.
Maybe there would be a 2028 swap, top 4 protected, that the Lakers would throw in for that.
Potentially. And so something like that could maybe
so that appeals to you as Portland. You would do that? I think I would do that.
I think I would do that.
The other guy, actually, that I think we should talk about them trading is Kamara. I would be very interested in trading Kamara. The question becomes what you could get for him. Like that Phoenix pick from the Cavs, like he actually would be a nice fit going back to Phoenix. Mm-hmm. But that's probably not enough, I don't think. Could I get another young player who's maybe a little bit more interesting as like some on-ball juice. I don't know about that. I mean, Kamara's 25. He's an organizational find. He's under contract for very little for 2 more years, or they can make him a restricted free agent after next year. But he just doesn't really, again, on like what this team is right now, I think he would have more value to a team that's good, and he makes so little. But if you like, let's say I could get that a pick in 29 or 25, the 29th pick in 25, and then the other Phoenix pick for Kamara. Once you got into something like that, then I would make that move. But I certainly would be listening on him. It just doesn't seem like, well, he's an organizational find. He's a good young player. We're a young team. We would never think of trading him, but just, and of course, the fact that they traded for Denny Avdia, who I would also possibly make available here as well, although he's playing a lot better lately. Just because of where, like, they're just so far away, particularly because if Shaden and Scoot were looking like, oh yeah, these are our 2 foundational pieces, let's build up around them, but they're just not at that level. Like, they just need more guys in the
and
door,
they need more time.
and they're they're just not plus that many picks right now. Like, they have 1 pick. Let's see.
It's
one.
They
basically have their plus 1 pick and 2 Milwaukee swaps.
Yeah. And so they're shorthanded in that, and it's similar to the discussions we've had with the Bulls and Kobe White and Ayo Dosunmu, where Kamara and why am I blanking on the other? And Avdia are both good players who can help out the Blazers, but they're not on the right timeline. And so when the Blazers are ready for that, those guys will be in a different phase. So move them to somebody else, and then you find the next Avdia, the next Kamara, and you make it work. And so for Avdia,
age-wise, they're on the right timeline, but contractually, probably not.
Exactly. And so because Kamara will probably be on his next contract by that point, Avdia will be on the same one, but it'll be towards the end of it rather than at the beginning. And so, yes, you gave up too much for Denny Avdia the first time. That doesn't change how you do things moving forward. You make the right move at the right time for you. And I agree with you on Kamara. And having a player who's that cheap, that opens up a lot of potential suitors, and it opens up a lot of suitors who can't do other things. So you can say like, okay, Team X, you can't trade this first for, you can't do matching salary or anything else. You could still take out Tamani Kamara because you have some sort of either minimum salary or some sort of exception, like even a piddling trade exception that he can fit into. So you can make it work, and he can make your rotation better and everything else. And so, like, I think they should be listening pretty hard on him. I can't say like they definitively should be shopping him, but yeah, like anytime a team,
what's your price for him?
A first that isn't, if it's the only asset, a first that isn't bottom 5, I think that would be enough. So 25.
Yeah, I think I would need more, because basically like a pick that's. Yeah, I mean, I guess a pick that isn't bottom 5. Like, I think I would either want 2 bites at the apple, because what you're kind of hoping to get once you get out of the lottery is another Tamani Kamara.
True.
And so I think I would want something where, because the idea of him is, Tamani Kamara just doesn't help us that much, but we need bites at the apple that have more upside. So I think I would either want 2 bites there, or maybe there's a young player who would be a little bit different that has more upside. I don't know who that is on a team that's, like this is, I don't think there's like a Reed Shepherd type out there that like, you would be tradable for Tamani Kamara. Like a team wouldn't do that. So I don't know that there's a deal that would convince me to do it. Whereas, but yeah, I think like, 2 lower level firsts, I would do, right? Those two Phoenix firsts that they just got to get Kamara back, ironically enough. Well, God, what a terrible trade that was for Phoenix. I think when you consider that like Kamara was like the best player in that deal. To just, and they felt like, oh yeah, we're like, these pieces we're getting for Nurkic, we're getting Nurkic and Grayson Allen, like those are so much more tradable, but like you can't aggregate them together, so they're prevented from doing any kind of a big deal. Like having Ayton, like he was unhappy there. I don't think he would have been good, but to also have had Kamara, like I think they would have been better off never making that move.
It's wild. I mean, it feels like it's simultaneously like mostly hurt both teams except for Kamara, of course, being useful in it. Player most likely
Yeah,
to be
we
traded.
should remember, that's an important thing to remember, that they got him. Now, his value at the time was he was like the 52nd pick. All right, most likely to be traded is who? Drop Reith.
I'm going to go Robert Williams.
He makes the minimum. Robert Williams? Yeah, I think it's probably got to be Rob. I mean, he's been like reasonably healthy.
And
by his standards.
And when he can play, people know what he can do because he's a fairly established commodity at this juncture.
Yeah, I wouldn't say he's been quite at the level we saw him before he went down, but yeah, Rob Williams has now played 16 games. So, but he also had 74% true shooting. Like, he can still play. It's just a question of the minutes is a big issue. Even when he's been available, Rob Williams has only been playing 17 minutes a game. Next up,
let's go to Denver. The Nuggets have won 8 out of their last 10, though they did lose to Minnesota on Saturday. And part of how they've been doing well is the improved play from Jamal Murray. They are currently hard capped at the second apron. They're about 12 million over the tax line. I'm sure that the Cronkies would love to save money. Not the first time I've said that, fired that salvo. The problem for the Nuggets is first of all, most of their money is tied up in 4 guys, in Jokic and Murray, who aren't getting moved, and Aaron Gordon and Michael Porter Jr. And then a lot of their other stuff is either in guys they want to keep or guys who are negative value contracts like Zeke Naji. So for Calvin Booth, and remember, they're also out a fair amount of overall picks. So the Denver, it's hard for them to get significantly better, but it might be possible using Michael Porter Jr. to restructure if that's what they want to do.
Yeah, but he also is the one guy in this team who really gives you a lot of shooting. They have less shooting than ever now with Westbrook playing such a role and Christian Brown and KCP in Orlando. So they're, as much as he is overpaid, you really would be desperate to replace that role. And I had floated the idea of maybe trading him for Cam Johnson. Cam Johnson's star has risen since then because of the way that he's played in Brooklyn. So I don't think that Denver necessarily has the scratch to go and get him. There's talk maybe that they would try to swap Porter for Levine. Levine's star has also risen since then. I think Porter's is kind of about the same. And then in terms of the assets, the Nuggets can trade a 2031 pick, although they cannot guarantee actually that will go. But I think and if I were a team acquiring that 2031 pick, I might demand that they take the protection off of their 27 and 29 picks, which are both 1 to 5 protected to OKC. And then they also owe this year's pick to Orlando 1 to 5 protected. So if they wanted to trade swaps, it's a little bit complicated by these protections, but you could either get that protection taken off. I'm sure those teams would be amenable to that, or you just swap with the idea that, top 1 to 5 protected in 25 and 27, you probably feel pretty decent that's going to go. Maybe 29 is far enough out that you wonder a little bit, but they are impacted somewhat in what they can trade. And then seconds, they are extremely limited. Am I reading this correctly? That they basically have no seconds that they can trade right now because they're so tied up with some of these picks potentially. Like these seconds are needed as possible replacements if they retain the first that they've already traded.
As I am reading things on Real GM, that is correct.
Wow. Yeah, I mean, they're another one of these teams that's just made a lot of these whittling away moves here and there. So they would love to get off of Zeke Naji, I'm sure. I don't see how they do that unless they trade that 2031 first, or unless they were to trade some of the guys that they have under contract already. You've got Peyton Watson. You've got Brown, are probably the biggest guy. Julian Strother, maybe someone would be interested in him, but he's been in their rotation. And they have Deron Holmes, who's on a torn Achilles right now, and he, I think they want to bring him back to be their backup center next year. They believed in him a lot. I think they thought he was going to be that this year. Yeah, the fact that they've been playing better makes them a lot less interesting, I would say. I think they can kind of just like put their head in the sand and think that this year's team is going to contend when I do think they need more.
They also don't really have the means to turn like a Dario Saric into somebody better because they don't have these seconds. And so Saric owed 5.2 this year and then has a player option, for 5.3, 5.2 next year. So
yeah, we have them a little bit less than there.
Okay.
I'll clean up which of us is right.
It's probably
like 4,
me.
6.
It's probably me. And so, but anyway, Saric owed more money than he's worth for this year and as a player option for next. And so, and you don't want to trade Westbrook and all these other things. So, and remember that they can't, their second apron hard capped and they're, I believe, fairly close to it. So they can't do a ton of like adding in trade. So it's just,
Yeah. By the way, yeah, we had the wrong number. You are correct.
Woo.
5.2.
And so they can't use seconds to improve. They can't use salary flexibility really very much to improve. And so I think that for the most, so you could theoretically, as I said, restructuring involving Michael Porter Jr., but Porter Jr. is owed a lot of money over the next 2 seasons after this one, both fully guaranteed. So it's a lot to take on. You brought up the possibilities from before. I think that both of those are weaker than they were. So it's hard for me to see what that, like, not even a paradigm shifting move, but like like even a window expanding move for them would look like, which is a shame because Jokic is having this astonishing season. And even though Murray's playing better, I think that you'd love to be able to do something like what Dallas did last year, where you can add a player who makes sense in your rotation, even if it takes an asset to do it. They just can't.
Pie in the sky, what would they be looking for?
Well, you can't lose.
Just more shooting. Like a stretch 5 off the bench, I guess. But when it matters, they'll probably just play Aaron Gordon at center. I mean, what would be wonderful would be either a 2 or a 3 who is a starter who could shoot, but they're just not built that way. And there isn't anyone like Christian Braun is a good player. So I don't think, I mean, maybe they would be willing to put him in for a deal, or like Peyton Watson, I think would have a lot of value elsewhere. They did just re-up Aaron Gordon on this long-term deal, but then you also run into the problem of the matching salary. I don't see a guy out there where, let's say you use Peyton Watson as a sweetener, and then you had Saric and Zeke Naji. So you could bring back someone in like the 15, 16 million range. That would be a deal you could think about, or maybe use Brown as a sweetener. But I think Watson is someone with Aaron Gordon, especially if you traded for a small forward type of guy. Maybe that would be a possibility, especially if that guy could shoot and guard a little bit on the perimeter. But again, that sort of player isn't around. Like Jeremy Grant, if he maybe made a little bit less and was better, and his contract didn't go out so long, that would be lovely. But there isn't now. And maybe like Caleb Martin would be kind of an interesting guy for them, but there isn't, like, I wouldn't trade Peyton Watson for him. I think Peyton Watson is probably as good or better than him right now, and obviously has a lot of upside. So I don't know where I would go in terms of putting in that 31 pick or Watson, even with the matching salary. There isn't a name that makes a ton of sense there for me.
Not for me either. I've tried to run through a number of different guys, and it's the simultaneous thing of being a player who is gettable for that, and also worth giving those things up for, and that's really hard to do.
Most likely to be traded, I'm gonna say probably Saric. The other thing that Jake brought up was the idea of them getting under the first apron so they could get a buyout guy. But even that seems pretty difficult. They are
very, very difficult.
Over $5 million over the first apron. So you're, they might, yeah, they probably can't get there with Saric alone. It would really have to be Naji, or it'd have to be like Saric and Vlatko Čančar. Čančar actually is another guy who is just, he's been hurt again. And like, yeah, but he's also Jokic's buddy. There isn't really, or maybe even like Jalen Pickett, who just hasn't really worked out. just to generally save money. But they're so low on even like anything to sweeten, even dumping $2 million that I don't know how they get below the first apron. And I mean, maybe is there a Zeke Najee plus their 2031 first for Tamani Kamara? And then Portland could figure out a way to dump money and stay under the tax in some other move. Yeah, like Kamara is not even necessarily available. Is there anyone else that's but I think if you're willing to give up an unprotected 2031 first, then you might be. But Denver is also kind of the one guy that doesn't necessarily need that skill set that much either, right?
Because some of the guys they have. Yeah, I think that's fair.
Yeah, like they've got Aaron Gordon, they've got Peyton Watson already in that sort of a role. But yeah, so most likely to be traded, I guess I'll say Chanchar, just because he's on a minimum and
he's like one of their only expiring contracts, and it seems like DeAndre
and he's just not playing.
Yeah. But
next up, here, let's see if we got any comments on that.
Sure, let's take a look. How is Braun and filler for RJ Barrett? They can't do it. That's the salary on that's not even close.
Yes, that's right. Yeah, I mean, where they are over the first apron right now, they can't take on more money than they're sending out. And Barrett's almost at $30 million. So really, you would just Porter Jr. would have to be involved in that. And I actually think RJ Barrett doesn't like Porter Jr. gives them more than RJ Barrett just because they don't have anyone else in that shooter role.
Yeah, and what RJ Barrett kind of brings to a team isn't what Denver needs. They have Jokic to generate a lot of stuff, and he doesn't provide consistent spacing. Let's put it that way. Let's go to the Utah Jazz. And the Jazz, don't have any concerns about saving money. They're they're barely over the cap. So because they used a lot of that cap space to do the Lauri Markkanen renegotiation extension. Remember that Lauri Markkanen is ineligible to be traded this deadline because of when he signed that renegotiation extension. So he's not on the table. The Jazz also, as presently constructed, don't really have much in the way of 2025 spending power. That may end up actually working out for them. That's an idea I've been thinking about the last couple weeks. But they could conceptually be, and I don't think they have a ton of guys that would be of interest to more competitive teams. Colin Sexton is probably the headliner there. Sexton making about 18.4 this year and then 19.2 next year, both fully guaranteed. And so Sexton, probably not the lead guy on a very good team, but somebody, as I brought up with OKC, that could be in the rotation. And so for the Jazz, I don't think the opportunity cost of trading him is too high. They're not trying to be competitive this year. I don't think they're going to try to be competitive next year. So it's just, can you get more for him? Would you like to do something now versus waiting until the offseason? And considering a team would get him for 2 potential playoffs and you get kind of the clarity on it, I would be pretty amenable to moving him now.
Yeah, at age 26, the problem is he may have more value to the Jazz. He's probably a 6-man on a good team. He starts for them. He could have, in theory, signed an extension this offseason. We didn't hear anything about those possible talks. He'll be going into the last year of his deal, making $19 million this offseason. He can't be extended right now because it's with 2 years left on his deal. They're in the middle of the season. You can only do that before the season, but this offseason, those talks would again be possible. And I think that Sexton as a one bad first probably isn't enough, particularly because Utah has plenty of bad firsts. They've been trying to get rid of bad firsts, as we saw in the Phoenix deal. But I think if OKC were interested in him, there would certainly be a deal to be had there. There isn't necessarily another team that comes to mind. Certainly where you run into the disconnect is just like who's bringing Sexton in to be a starter. Like not really that many good teams that come to mind for me. So the idea of OKC is like you bring in Sexton as a luxury. That was the same idea with Cam Johnson. But I'm not sure what other team really wants Colin Sexton that badly and that feels like he's going to make the difference for them where the opportunity cost is worth it. Like he could help the LA Lakers Definitely. Do they want to go? Is that what they want to fire their unprotected 2029 pick for? Would the Lakers be willing to top 4 protect it again, just like they did in 27? But yeah, but I don't think if you're the Lakers, you're like, oh yeah, Colin Sexton makes us a contender. Like, I don't think there's really anybody who is going to come to that conclusion. And then if he's not making you a contender, if he's not the missing piece, he's a luxury, and you might be willing to trade like a low first this year, though there aren't that many teams that have those for rotation piece. So then the Jazz probably are like, no, we'll just hold on to it.
Yeah, you're gonna have to beat the offer that they think they could get. And I mean, because the Jazz aren't, it's not like it's a fait accompli that Sexton has to leave. They could theoretically sign him to extension. They could sign him as an unrestricted free agent in 26. They'll have plenty of means to do so, and they'll have full bird rights. So I don't think a mediocre first gets it done. That's why I think it's actually fairly unlikely that he actually gets traded. I brought up the idea that I would be amenable, but that's more on the idea that I don't think the offers in the summer are going to be significantly better than a mediocre first. Like, I think that's just kind of what the market for this type of valued bench scorer, but probably not a starter or closer on a good team. Like, that's generally what those kind of guys go for. And the way that the Jazz could upend that would be if they could take on some really bad money, but there isn't that much really bad money, especially that has been identified as such. So if the Hornets were really soured on Miles Bridges and are like, oh, we want to get off of his money, but I don't think they are. I don't think that there are a number of those kind of situations. And like we talked about this a little bit when we did worst contracts in the league, that there aren't that many of those situations right now. So as the Jazz, I wouldn't do it for a late first, just because I think that offer is always there and you never know if it could get better. And with only 1 year left, the risk actually isn't that high. It's not like Jeremy Grant where it's like, oh shit, if he has a bad year, then
and
we're potentially eating
too.
Yeah, we're going to eat 3 years of this. So if all that's on the table is a late first, then don't do it. And or if you could get somebody, second draft guy who interests you, and they, of course, the Jazz love identifying guys that they can
now like Anthony Black from Orlando. Like that's one where I would start to consider it, even though I'm not the hugest Anthony Black.
Yeah, but he's got talent. I mean, exactly, and that's the idea of, like, I think Anthony Black has more than like a late first value, so you could go at it in that way, and that also just changed some of the roster crunch issues in time. So yeah,
just to finish up on Sexton quickly, like he also just provides a benefit to just making this team semi-watchable, and they have so many of these late firsts already. It just, like, you can always shut him down at the end of the year. Like, he's at least someone who can, like, do something with the ball and not look pathetic out there,
Agreed.
And then straight shooter, quick question here: Sexton and John Collins for Zeke, Najee, and MPJ plus the 2031 unprotected. I don't think Denver would want to do that again, just because they would be so low on shooting.
Well, and
at
because
that point, and John Collins like another power forward. They don't.
Where do those guys? Those guys probably don't close games for the Nuggets. So why would they give up an unprotected first to trade for two guys that it's not like it saves them a ton of money?
Yeah, I think it would maybe a little. I don't know. I can't remember exactly. I would have to do the math on who would. So yeah, Najee and MPJ would be like 45. Yeah, so it would be pretty close in terms of the. So it wouldn't give Denver like a ton of savings, I don't think, necessarily. So, but John Collins is someone who's very available. Maybe next year is an expiring contract. Like, he actually has been pretty decent this year, but again, not a guy you look at as a starter on a good team. The Lakers are a team that comes to mind for him, because then he could, in theory, play with Davis and give them more size. You don't want him playing center. Maybe you could have him play backup center on a team like the Kings and also play some 4 next to Sabonis. And the Jazz, like Kevin Huerter wouldn't be a terrible fit on the Jazz. Obviously, I'm defaulting to the teams we've already discussed and the fit of John Collins there, but I don't think that, like, maybe he has some appeal, but it's just the matching salary coming back is just massive, right? Even for a team like LA, like, yeah, I wouldn't be totally against adding him and moving on from Hachimura, though those guys actually kind of have some similarities in terms of being more of an offensive bent. But Collins can do stuff as a rebounder and maybe more as a basket protector than Hachimura. So, Vincent and Hachimura for Collins, but then what asset are you getting? Is that again like we'll throw in Dalton Connect and that's how we get to this? I think it's just like John Collins is just not a good enough player unless he's just offering like so much salary relief for a team, but there isn't a team that needs to cut money that has a guy who's just like making $35 million and Collins makes 25 and the Jazz can just take that guy back and save that team $10 million. So there isn't an equivalent of like the Lowry for Rozier trade.
No.
For example, last year, that a big motivation for that was it saved Miami a bunch of money. There aren't necessarily those big expiring contracts on good teams where they want to get back something for him and save money for that year. And then the fact that he has bad money going out isn't as bothersome.
No, I think it's going to be very hard to make a John Collins trade right now for that exact reason.
Would like, we're about to talk about Minnesota. Would Minnesota, Julius Randle is making 33 right now and Collins makes 25. Minnesota give up Julius Randle for John Collins?
I don't think
they want the money for next year, right? Probably
no,
not.
They don't want. They don't want.
Though it saves them $8 million for this year.
And but in terms of the commitment and John Collins has that player option, which I'm very confident he's going to pick up. Which I think that tells you all you need to know. We're more confident that Collins is going to pick up his option than Randle with his. So that means he probably shouldn't do the move as Minnesota. But I think John Collins, like it's in the modern era, especially, like he's not horrendously overpaid, but he's expensive and doesn't play a premium position. And so that's just hard.
Kadar, what do we think of the Walker Kessler trade rumors? Would you look to move Kessler if you were Utah? I would certainly consider it. I think I'm one of the bigger Kessler believers out there. I know that you are as well. He's bounced back this season. His offensive rebounding actually has been very intriguing. And he's gotten better as a screener this year. And his rim protection hasn't been as nuclear as before. But I think on a real defensive team, he could get back to that. What would your price be for Walker Kessler, if anything? Because the Jazz are sort of in the same spot as Portland in terms of, like, Kessler probably has more value for another team than he does for them.
It would be a lot because I think he's a viable center of the future. I don't think he's like a top 10 center, but I think that he could potentially be a top 20. I believe in his rim protection. I think he has enough offensive game to be there. So, like, for example, I would be more confident in Kessler's place than I would like Onyeka Okongwu. And so for me, to get that type of player off, to get them for a pick that I was confident would be in the lottery, I'd probably do it. Especially if it had a more upside than that. But it's always hard to move that type of player when you don't have a replacement. And I don't know this draft. I haven't, started my work yet on it to have somebody like that. So I wouldn't really see it as a reasonable way to do it.
Yeah, I'm trying to think of what teams really would be willing to pay up for Walker Kessler. For whom would it make sense? And I think actually the Phoenix Suns is the one.
Yeah, that's the one I thought of.
For. That they just trade those same picks right back to Utah again. Now because. And we talked about the Suns at the beginning of the show where maybe they're like, all right, we're going to do the Butler thing. That didn't work out. So just trade those picks right back. So the equivalent would be that they're trading that 2031 pick for Kessler.
What about,
he might actually make a difference for them. I don't know.
Nate, what about
Dallas? What about Dallas?
Ooh, I was thinking New Orleans. Dallas, I still like Derek Lively quite a bit. And so I don't think they have the scratch.
Well, the idea would be that he could replace Lively now, and then you just probably move Gafford in the summer.
But Dallas doesn't have they don't have any juicy firsts from like other teams moving forward. That's what I'd be looking for.
No, you'd be looking at one of these picks down the road, like a 2031 Dallas pick. Yeah, I wouldn't necessarily even say that that's enough. Frankly, I'm trying to think of who else would really be interested.
Oh, I had one.
Kessler.
We were talking
about
the
Lakers was one. Like, how about 2029 unprotected first from the Lakers? I wouldn't
Ooh.
want to do that as LA just because I think the fit with Davis, like Kessler just wouldn't be closing games. I don't think.
Oh, so Nate, the other team I brought up, I'm I like
Yeah.
Ibisi, but New Orleans, just because he's Kessler's cost controlled for a
Yeah.
couple of years.
But you wouldn't do that at this point in time. You might do it in the off season.
Yeah, it would only be if you thought for whatever reason that the price was lower right now, but I don't know why that would be. Oh, what about Memphis?
I mean, they got Zach Edey already. I think.
I guess
And
that's
I don't
true.
know that. Yeah.
But
So
I think of
really, yeah.
I think of Kessler having, he could be more like a 30-minute a game guy. I like Edey. I think he's had a nice rookie year, but I'd be more confident in him as the potential
Yeah.
real answer.
The Knicks are a team that's come up for Kessler as well, but I don't think they really have the scratch to do it in terms of picks. I mean, they've got this Washington pick, like big whoop. That's not enough as far as I'm concerned. They've got some swaps. They have like a 26th swap and a 30 swap. I don't think that gets there for me. So I think really like Phoenix to me is the only team that off the top of my head, I just kind of went through the standings just to double check where he I maybe actually another guy would be Indiana if that like he's the Turner replacement.
And they're actually not out that many picks moving forward because so much of what they traded for Pascal Siakam has already gone. So I think they're only out one. They're out there 2026, and it could slide over to 27.
Yeah, but then again, that's maybe more of a summer move as well if Turner just doesn't come back and then they make a trade for a new center. Most likely to be traded for the Jazz. I'm gonna go with Collins here just because it seems like maybe or actually no. I'm gonna go Drew Eubanks. Drew Eubanks, yeah. Yeah, that's another one. All right, yeah, just give us a second, whatever. We'll send him on his merry way.
And Eubanks having a non-guarantee for next year, that could be intriguing for some teams where it's just like we can make our own decision. And his guarantee date is the league-wide cutdown day, so you could just go into the offseason, see if you want him around, and then you could just let him go in camp or whatever.
Yeah, I actually think Svi Mykhailiuk is someone who could help a team as well. Svi Mykhailiuk is on a 4-year contract.
4-year contract with no guaranteed money after this year. Each one, it's an early guarantee date, but it's non-guaranteed until basically the end of June each year.
Yeah, he actually last game I saw him, he kind of impressed me a little bit. And he's got like a little more toughness than your average shooter guy.
I mean, Svi, very briefly on Svi, I think he has had the weakest career of any player that you, Mike Schmitz, and I all really liked. Like that basically never happens.
I'm sure there's got to be worse. There are guys that are completely out of the league.
Maybe I'd have to. Oh, next time I see Schmitz, we'll try to figure it out.
But okay, let's finish up with Minnesota.
Yes, and Minnesota, another comically expensive team. Well into the second apron, that limits what they can do. Also, potentially of note, I thought it was fascinating that they waived PJ Dozier already, because the most common way that this is happening now, modern NBA, is that you keep that guy through the guarantee date, trade them to a team, and then that other team takes on their whole salary. But remember that this might be different for the second apron because these teams can't send out cash. So maybe they just thought no team will do that. So we'll just eat that partial money on him and everything moving forward. So they had to pay him $1 million instead of trading the whole thing. So for the Wolves, they're, deep into the second apron, and they have, they've had a disappointing year. I don't think that anything's happening with Gobert or Ant, probably not with Jaden McDaniels either. Mike, do you think that Tim Connolly is going to consider a bigger move, or is this more on the margin stuff?
Oh man. In terms of what they need, it's always tough when, and at least they're going to get DiVincenzo back. They have a lot of depth on this team. And I think some of those guys haven't played up to their standard quite yet. And then they also have the issue that Naz Reid, Julius Randle, and Nickeil Alexander-Walker, the former two have player options for next year. Alexander-Walker has been really good at the start of the year. He's kind of fallen off a little bit of late. But those are guys that they presumably are going to want to bring back. I actually would project that Julius Randle is going to opt into his $30.9 million player option for next year, unless maybe they do a Gobert and he opts out and signs for longer just to save him the tax money. Reed, they'll have full bird rights on. You would think that he will be in line for a raise. He and Randall are somewhat redundant with one another, however. So a lot of this, I think, is just what the plan is going forward, and they just haven't, because they've had such a weird up and down year, they don't have as much clarity as they did, or as I think they would have liked to have had. But I don't think, like, because they have so little to trade, but particularly they already traded their 2031 first. I mean, that's really the bigger limiting factor, is just that they, other than this Detroit pick, that's actually looking juicier with Detroit's improvement. That's top 13 this year, top 11 next year, then top 9 in 27, and then converts to a 27 second. So that's actually a pick that looks a lot better, and no one ever talks about that from the Towns trade. So they could attach that to something, but particularly, like, I don't know who's even available on the market that's like an upgrade at really any of their positions right now.
To me, the idea that would be most intriguing would be trading Julius Randle for a player, and they could be at a number of different positions that you think has a greater chance of being in your starting or closing lineup moving forward. But what is the player? So Julius Randle, and as a second neighbor team, it's the same general thing as with the Suns. So he makes 28.9 this year. So you can't trade for anybody who's making even $1 more than that. But somebody who's in the mid 20s, something like that, because the other team probably isn't going to want to, take on that much extra money, who simultaneously is available for probably Randall and a first, presumably that Detroit first, that can do it. And so, I mean, I'll try to look at a couple. So we're looking more in like the mid 20s type of player.
Yeah. Quickly, just to correct you there, he got paid a 15% trade bonus, so his number is actually 33 this year.
Okay, so that makes them more expensive, but that does open things up. I hadn't put the trade bonus into my sheet, so that opens things up a little bit, but not with anybody that really excites you. Like, okay, you could get Jeremy Grant or Miles Bridges. Like, that's not necessarily fantastic.
Yeah, I and also Randall, as much as maybe people feel like he's been a disappointment this year, like he does, like their offense is actually really humming lately. Like he's helping them set up more threes.
Yeah.
And he does play an important role on their second unit as as the secondary creator. And I mean, I think maybe you would say point guard is where they need to upgrade the most. But with Mike Conley not playing that well, but they have Dillingham in that role for the future.
Yeah, so
I really think I would be trying to sit tight. Money dumping is probably what would make the most sense.
And in terms of that, Joe Ingles, I mean, just as a minimum guy, you could potentially save something there. And I mean, all the other ones, like if you have a definitive decision on somebody like Naz Reid or somebody like that, you could do something, but I don't know that now is the right time. And I mean, they're the other like low money guys. I think they're hoping that some of those guys can help like at some point like that. I mean, if you're willing to cut bait on Leonard Miller, you could do that now. If they're higher on Luka Garza than I've ever been, but it's not easy.
I actually think Luka Garza could be a reasonable backup center for somebody. But they have a lot of kind of deep bench guys who are interesting. And I just, of all these names we've talked about all these times, there's nobody that I think really changes their destiny. Like they have a good starting five and like 3 good bench guys. It's really just that those guys need to play a little bit better and mesh a little bit better. There isn't this of all the teams we've talked about, I would say they have the least obvious hole in their rotation, even if some of those guys haven't quite been what they would have hoped at times.
Well, and it's also the idea that getting those guys to play better is probably a more realistic way to improve than trading Julius Randle for an upgrade, which I just don't see a real good way for that to happen.
A couple other thoughts here. Kadar says, I was thinking if they could move Dillingham for someone who is better right now. The matching salary aspect would be difficult. Maybe Mike Conley would get thrown in there, but they're just what is the point guard who's going to be that much of an upgrade that also would fit into their long-term salary structure. The whole reason they got Dillingham and also that they gave Conley that extension is they're just so expensive going forward. They alleviated that some with the Gobert opt out and then extension this off season, but they still their salary structure is massive, and then they want to re-sign Reed and Alexander Walker too, and who knows what happens with Randall. So yeah, Kadar says, is there a way to get Fred VanVleet to Minnesota? I don't. I mean, I think Houston is really good. They're better than Minnesota. I don't know
and Houston
and he's under control.
Minnesota's a second apron team, so it would have to involve Gobert or Edwards, and that's not going to happen.
That's true, yeah, because I mean VanVleet's making like $42 million or whatever it is. And let's see here, Vooch and Giddey for Randall and change. I mean, so now you're gonna pair Naz Reid and Vooch. That I don't think that really makes a ton of sense there either. Bringing in paying this team just can't afford to pay $20 million for a guy who would be really their third best center.
Well, and the structure with Minnesota as a second apron team would be very, very tricky because it has to be 2 1-for-1 deals and get that. And so who the person who's going for Giddey, that's going to, because Giddey makes like, I think 8.5. So then it's going to have to be somebody else.
Yeah, one more here. Dillingham for Kessler. And then Gobert plus the Detroit pick for a guard that makes less. Yeah, so that guard, I don't know. I mean, I think like this is a team that I still believe in their upside at least a little bit this year. And like that would be Gobert is probably someone who has negative value going forward. So even pairing him with the Detroit pick, I don't think you're getting like a star point guard to put next to Edwards. And you don't want to take the ball out of Edwards' hands too much. So I know it's really boring. Like they have a lot of interesting players. They have some assets, but I think it's just going to be try to save some money and let's see where we are. There's so much uncertainty for them in the off season too. I would want to just hope that they play better. I think that's really the big, and hope that they gel because they have a lot of talent on this team. And I think if there's a possibility that it could come together for them, particularly on the defensive end, because their offense has been very intriguing lately. Most likely to be traded would be,
I'm going Ingles.
Yeah, I think that's right. Just to save, like just simply by moving Ingles, then they would save quite a bit.
And very briefly, we got asked about Randall for CJ McCollum. That deal is not allowed because of the second apron. And then
no, it doesn't. Randall doesn't make a
I have Randall's number wrong. Let me look at it with the actual number.
No, I think it's still
closer.
CJ makes nope. CJ still makes a little bit more than him this year, like 200,000.
That's enough.
Yeah, and CJ also he would be a kind of interesting fit next to Ant. That wouldn't be, but I think Randall is just a better player than him. Like Randall actually causes the opposing team some problems in a way that CJ doesn't.
Oh, and that is a very good note from DR that Gobert, because his extension was signed so late, he actually can't be traded until the offseason.
Yep, that is a good point. And also, if they know they can't re-sign Alexander Walker financially, should they look to move him? I don't know why you would feel that at this point. It's just too up in the air because you've got Randall possibly opting out. You've got Reed possibly opting out. And maybe you don't know what the market for those guys is going to be either. So I mean, they have full bird rights on Alexander Walker.
Right.
Like there's nothing stopping them other than money. They don't even know who their owner is going to be. That's the other thing we probably didn't even talk about enough, Danny, is just that and we don't know who their GM is going to be. Tim Conley could leave too. So I think that this is just it's all screams we're just going to chill and maybe try to save a little money, and that's about it. And even, I mean, Glenn Taylor, he might know that he's going to lose the team and be like, yeah, well, let's just stick A-Rod in them with the bill. They you don't have to write that check until July.
Yeah, that's very possible. And I think that the other, I mean, there's enough talent here. This team made the conference finals last year that being a little bit desperate is, I don't think there's much they could do that can really move the needle for them.
All right, then that will do it for this blockbuster. And I encourage all of you to, number one, sign up for our free mailing list, but more importantly, use the code mock deadline 25. Is that the code? I can never.
That's what you said at the beginning, I believe.
Is it mock trade? No, it is mock deadline 25. And that can get you 35% off a yearly membership just in time to listen to the full mock trade deadline tomorrow. We'll talk to you all then.